So I just woke up out of a dead sleep. It's exactly 2 a.m. I was dreaming of a woman sitting outside of my window. She got in. She toyed with me like a sick game of hide and seek until she pinned me against my exit door. I woke up terrified and waited for shadows out of my window. I walked down the hall to pee and couldn't shake this feeling of being watched. I rationalized my fear as I checked the house. Everything was fine. Ella is safe, cats were normal. Still, I couldn't shake this creepy feeling, and it was intensifying. I woke up my partner, who saw that I was visibly panicked, shaking and tears running down my cheeks. He got up and bravely walked with me down the house. Nothing was visibly wrong, but one step into the front bedroom felt like a wrecking ball to the gut. I felt like I had the wind knocked out of me, and my whole body turned into goose pimples, or chicken skin, if you will. I felt like I had passed a threshold where I wasn't welcome. We had a little bit of sage, so my partner started smudging the house while I meditated. He started in the bedroom, and I stood in the hallway, directing the energy to an open window and blocking access to the back of the house. I felt every second of this spirit passing through my body to cross the hallway. My skin visibly stood on end, raising and settling at the same time like a slow motion shiver. I've never had such an intense feeling. I'm not even sure how to describe it. Heavy? Large? Weighty? Those seem like words. My partner followed behind the energy, and we coaxed it out of the window. I closed it, and he continued to sage the rest of the house. He felt something too, but whatever it was, it's gone now. I don't have that intense feeling anymore, but I do think I'm going to watch a little Bob's Burgers before I try to sleep again. In the early 90s, my sister was born healthy, but a year and a half later, she died of unknown causes, SIDS. The medical team managed to resuscitate her once, but when she died again, they determined she may not make it, even if they resuscitated her again, or she would have permanent brain damage. At the brink of divorce, they had me a year later, around the same time this happened, born in the month she died, to my mom's dismay. Fast forward to a day before the accident. Weird things happened all day. Sounds of glass breaking made my parents jump and run outside, checking all our windows, but there wasn't any broken glass. This repeated itself a couple more times. My brother was just a baby, and he cried hysterically, and whenever he wasn't, he was looking up and babbling at no one. Before bed, there was knocking, and my parents checked the front door, but no one was there. I was a young kid at the time, so I was just uncomfortable, but unsure about what was going on. The next morning, my mom could not get my early riser brother up from bed, as we normally went to bed easily too. But he was fussy all night, which was unusual for him. My dad had to take me to a doctor's appointment, and usually we went as a family. Dad told us to stay home and let him sleep. We were on the interstate, and were going to take an exit, and I remember a car cutting from the far left. I always sat back seat, driver's side, so I saw it in the window, and it hit our car, leaving us in a spin while they kept going. We rolled down a steep embankment and hit a tree head on. Dad lost power steering and braking ability, so we hit a full-size tree at 75. It fell on top of the car, crushing the passenger side, where my mom and baby brother would have been sitting. I died. I remember it didn't hurt, and I remember being in the rubble pressed into the ground out the back window. It hurt after I was resuscitated in the ambulance with a neck brace. I was resuscitated again at the hospital, and they told my mom in front of me, keep her talking. If she falls asleep, she won't wake up again. Years later, I found out both my dad and I had zero chances of making it out alive. He was almost impaled through the heart by millimeters. I had a touch brain bleed. No doctor was able to believe we survived. If my brother or mom were there, they would have died. My mom told me this happened 10 years ago to the day that my sister died, but they didn't resuscitate her a second time like they did me. She felt like fate was trying to keep her from ever having a baby girl. What bothers me most is our baby pictures are identical. Sure, we dress different, but other than that, you couldn't tell us apart. I'm sure I'm not her, but I feel chills now every time I look at those pictures, and mortified that my mom disclosed to the day we almost died was the same day she passed away. Mom believes my older sister was looking out for us the day before and helped me survive that day because the bleed should have taken my life. Part of me feels guilty that they saved me and tried a second time, but not with her. Even with my injuries and blood loss, they tried, but they didn't try with a healthy baby. Other things have happened in the house before and after this all took place, and to this day, I feel uncomfortable at the family home. I need some help figuring out what is going on in my house. About a year and a half ago, I moved into an older home out in the country with a friend from college. We have bedrooms that share a wall. Ever since we've moved in there have been strange instances. During the day, we'll get weird feelings that something is watching us. We'll hear footsteps upstairs, and things will be moved around or knocked over in the kitchen. About 6 months in of us living together, her boyfriend moved in, and I started staying over at my boyfriend's more often. At this point, I would notice when I got home my TV was on. It's always off when I leave in the morning for work. I don't sleep with it on. And a decorative box I have under the TV unit is always shoved to the back end of the shelf. My friend said she started noticing in the mornings that I was gone that she would hear movement in my room, with the closet and dresser doors opening, clothes shifting, as if I was there. It seems as though something was mimicking the sounds I would make in the mornings as I was getting ready for work. A few weeks ago, her and her boyfriend were gone for the weekend, and I had the house to myself. The house cat was also gone for the weekend. I was woken up in the middle of the night. I'm not sure what time it was, but I felt the cat jump onto bed with me by my feet and started kneading the bed as she usually would. It wasn't until I reached down to pet him and found that nothing was there to realise he wasn't even in the house. We've also seen a man in random areas of the house, usually upstairs in one of the guest rooms or walking into a bathroom. I only caught glimpses of him, and he's always walking into a room when we catch him, and he's gone when we go to investigate. Do you guys think this stuff is related to each other? Any ideas what this could be? We live in a rural area out in the country in Illinois. We've been told there were Native Americans that used to inhabit the property. Not sure if that gives any clues. Any comments would be helpful. This happened when I was about 12 or 13, back when I had an incredible attachment to MSN. My mother had left me alone for a few hours to go grocery shopping, which meant that I had the family computer to myself, and I was excited to chat with my friends online without interruption. A few hours go by, and I still haven't moved from the computer in the living room. My mom suddenly bursts through the door with grocery bags upon grocery bags, and immediately starts yelling at me. Why didn't you help me with the groceries? I was confused and startled. I didn't know she was home. I would have come out to the car to help her. As I tell her this, she becomes angrier and explains that she saw me watching her struggle from the upstairs bathroom window, and instead of helping her, I just watched her. I froze. I knew that I hadn't left the computer on the main floor, not once. But before I could protest, she went back outside to grab the rest of the groceries. I tried to explain myself after the fact, but she didn't want to hear it. I let it go, but I knew that something was very wrong with that house. The thought of someone or something pretending to be you is the most terrifying thought to ever almost cross the boundaries into my reality. I hated that house. One night, not too long after we moved in, I was home alone and sitting on the couch in the living room. I was expecting my mother to come home any minute. While texting, I heard a knocking on the window which was behind me, across the room to the right. It was definitely coming from the window, clear as day. But as I turned around and squinted towards the window, all I saw was black nothingness into the night. But the knocking continued. I honestly thought it was my mom. Maybe she forgot her keys, I thought. But why would she be in the backyard? Why wouldn't she knock on the front door? It was a knock that demanded attention. I got up and walked towards the window. The knocking stopped as I looked into the window and saw nothing. I hesitantly pressed my hands against the cold window and cupped my face to look outside. And nothing. I turned to face the kitchen and I immediately noticed that all the cabinets were open, even the hard-to-reach ones above the fridge. I could have sworn they weren't open a second before when I approached the window. I thought that the haunting had followed my family when that happened. But luckily, nothing else happened in that house. I moved out shortly later to live on my own, and things have settled down in the paranormal realm. I lived in this house until I was 15, then moved across the country. As the house ended up staying in the family, I've been staying here since I moved back a year ago, after 7 years of being away. It wasn't a peaceful home by any means. My mother was severely mentally ill and was very violent, physically and verbally towards us, as well as neglectful. I think she perpetuated really bad energy here. When I was a kid, strange things would happen often. For example, things would go missing for months at a time before reappearing in the middle of the floor. The dog would always bark at one specific place in mid-air between 9 p.m. and 11 p.m. Things on shelves downstairs would constantly get moved around or thrown on the floor. Water taps would turn on. Cabinets in the kitchen would open and close. There seemed to be some kind of spirit in a red jacket who would come to the door during the day and evening at seemingly random intervals, knock, wait, and then leave. All of these could be their own story, but few things have left a severe imprint in my memory. There was one experience in particular that comes to mind wherein I in particular, left the house in a very specific condition. As I was midway through a chore, in particular, the cover for the downstairs futons were brought off the clothesline and left in a basket on top of the dryer in the laundry room, which is quite far from the room in which this takes place. The furniture was in a square L-shaped fall as it usually was. When I put the dog in the kennel, I made sure to only do up to the first lock, as he was a very good boy who never tried to get out. I remember this vividly. When we got back, I immediately went downstairs, talking with my brother, to let the dog out. He was whimpering and whining loudly as we came down the stairs and in the hall. When we turned into the family room, the dog was crouched to the very back of his kennel, sitting on top of the futon cover and visibly terrified. The kennel locks had been switched. The bottom one was now locked and the top was unlocked. The futon mattress was absolutely shredded, as if an animal with teeth had found great joy when ripping it apart. The footstool for the chair was left in a similar fashion. The faux leather upholstery had been ripped off at the corner, and the foam had very clear bite marks in it. I do mean bite marks. In addition to the bite-shaped chunks of foam torn off, there were very distinct tooth imprints torn into the foam. The shape and size of the bite marks was not even close to a dog, It was about as wide as a grown adult's jaw, and the teeth themselves were flat across with no distinct canine. You know, like a human bite mark. It was a human bite mark. The stool had been dragged over towards the futon from in the corner, about a total of 3 feet. The futon itself, normally perpendicular to the wall, had been dragged by one corner several feet until it was maybe a 30-degree angle from the wall and about 2 feet back from its normal placements on one end and like 5 on the other. We opened the kennel and the dog shot upstairs at Mach fucking 5 speed. We checked all the windows and doors and all had been locked. There was no trace of dirt or debris anywhere to suggest a break-in. There was nothing stolen. The dog wasn't physically hurt as far as we could tell. We've never found a logical explanation for this. This happened as my mother was trying to list the house for sale, and later that day, we had a house inspection lady come in. Since I've been back, nothing of this caliber has occurred. Electronics will turn on and off still, occasionally. Sometimes I hear someone knocking on the window on the path to the house. Things still go missing and reappear once in a while, but it's not a constant thing. I believe while I was gone, the house had been cleansed by a psychic. I do practice witchcraft and have put up several protection charms and barriers around the house in the time I've been here, so we haven't heard people laughing outside the windows lately. I can't go down to the basements, where the majority of the more extreme things happen, as it is rented out currently, so I can't say if it's much worse downstairs than it was. I'm wondering if the house or spirits here simply have less bad energy to feed off, or if it's just genuinely less haunted. Just today, I was trying to fall asleep and my phone turned on. It was on TikTok, but it wasn't the last video I had seen. I ignored it and tried going back to sleep. One of my papers fell off my desk. I get that my fan is on, but my fan is always on. It's never fallen before. It's never moved before either. The lights recently went out in my kitchen and they came back on when my mom accidentally burned herself. They've been going on and off at random times, but it's mostly when I'm downstairs by myself. That usually signals to me that it's time to go upstairs. The thing is that my dad recently passed away. I have dreams with him every now and then, but he's never dead in the dream. I'm way older too. The last dream I had with him, he was telling me something important. He was worried, but I forgot what he told me. A few months back, I had a weird-ass dream where someone was in my room and behind me. I pretended that I was asleep. He was talking to me and pretending to be my dad. He told me, "Bless you," but I didn't sneeze. I didn't say a word. I don't know what the fuck is going on. It was a very busy day at the store yesterday. We had way more deliveries than we could handle, and the waiting times were just terrible. Some people had to wait for their order for 2 hours. Because of the hectic evening, I was still at the store very late. The people I closed with went home, and I was all by myself. I locked the front door out of safety, and because one of the customers was threatening me before closing, I went back into the office. The thing about this office is that it's pretty closed off. The door is pretty much in the center of the store, but it's a very small room. You can only really see the rest of the store via the cameras. At around 2 a.m., I was still working on some paperwork. The store was dead quiet, and I had the office door open. All of a sudden, I heard a music box-like tune. It sounded like something that would come out of a music box, but without the mechanical stuff you always hear. The tune was pretty slow and clear, like a tune for a baby. I went to the main part of the store to check, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Scared the crap out of me. The store's pretty new, and there are lots of computers around, But I've worked there for 7 years and I've never heard anything like that before. I can't really pinpoint where the sound could have come from. It was probably some random noise made by a shake machine, but I don't get why it would randomly make a quiet tune like that, which I then wouldn't have noticed for years. My mom died in June, and after the funeral, I took in her 6-year-old cat. When he was with my mom, he stayed hidden most of the time, either under the bed or sofa. You'd rarely spot him anywhere else. After I took him in, I had no clue that this cat is actually really active, friendly, and loving. A week after moving in with me, I could see that he chose me as his owner. I have a husband and kid as well. With them, he's accepting, but doesn't show any affection. About a month after my mom had died, I noticed that the cat started and meowed in one certain spot in my kitchen, and it felt eerie. This lasted a couple of weeks. Then, it all of a sudden stopped. But now I've noticed that he won't let me look at myself in the mirror, like when I get ready for work, etc. I have 3 mirrors in total, one in the bathroom, one in the bedroom, and one in the living room. And at this point, it doesn't matter which one I choose. He insists I pay attention to him and follow him away from the mirror. At one point I joked about it that, yeah, I know, there's nothing to look at, when he started to behave like this. But now it feels off already. He could be in another room and he somehow feels when I approach the mirrors and bolts towards me to make a distraction. At least it feels like that. From time to time, I feel like maybe I'm imagining it, but it happens all the time and I feel uneasy already. What's in those mirrors then? Has anyone witnessed something like that? Summer 2016. It was around midnight on a Saturday night. My best friend and I were at the beach observing a meteor shower, as we did every summer. After catching a couple of shooting stars, we witnessed a couple of flashes that lit almost the entire sky. Though we were surprised, we didn't give it much thought, as it could be related to whatever natural phenomenon, maybe even related to the meteor shower. On the way back home though, these flashes kept happening. As strange as it sounds, it felt as if they chased our car from afar. My friend and I joked about it, but we didn't feel entirely in a joking way. Now, it's when things get real. Halfway to my friend's place, we drove through the woods to get to one of our favourite spots since childhood. Just a short tunnel in the back roads where we always used as a place to smoke a cig and listen to some 80s rock. The acoustics of the tunnel made it the perfect place for that. The tunnel is barely 15 metres long. We parked the car at its end, looking towards a crossroads. The road ahead climbs uphill through a dense eucalyptus forest. We lit a cigarette and put on some Frank Zappa tunes. It was all normal, and we were talking about uni and life in general, when all of a sudden, I saw a flash. I looked ahead and saw a beam of light. The light was projected diagonally from the top of the trees towards the road. The beam was mirrored on the other side of the road, so it looked like a V. This V of light kept getting brighter and brighter until it vanished. But the moment it vanished, the V was still there. Only this time, it was as if somebody had cropped it out of the picture in Photoshop. I could see all the way through the hill and the trees through this V. So far, I could see an old abandoned military radio station that's 1 kilometre away from the spot we were at. It was at this moment that I turned to my friend, and I saw his face was as shocked as mine probably was. We realised we both saw this, and somehow, even though Frank Zappa was playing loudly just seconds before, there was a moment of total silence, which I then noticed had started when the V light appeared. My friends and I looked at each other and, as if we communicated telepathically, we put on the belts, turned on the car, and got the hell out of there as fast as we could. My friend was so shocked, he He asked me to please drop him on his doorstep instead of the usual spot about 100 meters away from his house. Honestly, I was scared. I slept with my window closed that night. To this day, we have no idea what it was that happened that night, or how in the world that was even possible. All we know is that we both saw it, and we feel lucky to have witnessed such a strange phenomenon. So I live in a small seaside town called Blackpool in the UK that had a few important airfields during the war. It was home to 303 Squadron, who were the mostly Polish pilots trained by the RAF and were provided with Supermarine Spitfires, Hawker Hurricanes, and one other fighter aircraft, I believe. Anyway, the airfield became a fully fledged airport after the war, with a terminal building and many more hangars for commercial and private aircraft. Previously, it was just a grass runway and a few military hangars. During construction, they were knocked down, all except one. To this day, that one remaining hangar is maintained, and it's become a small museum. It contains the aircraft, along with equipment and even the uniform of R.G. Kellett, a commander of the squadron. I went for a visit once, as I'm super interested in the history of the aircraft, due to my granddad being a Spitfire pilot himself. I walked through the entrance and into the hangar, which had rope barriers around the aircraft that makes a one-way path around all the planes in there. After looking at the first plane and reading about it on a podium, I look up to see a man who looked about in his 40s, dressed in the RAF flying gear, with the leather cap, goggles around his neck, leather flying coat, a bright red scarf, and the smart uniform underneath. It's a dark blue uniform called Best Blues. I didn't really think anything of it at the time and assumed he's one of the staff dressed up in the traditional uniform to put on a show. I thought this because I'd seen a similar thing a few months prior in another museum where staff dressed up as World War I soldiers, Roman soldiers, pilots and stuff who were acting constantly and patrolling the museum. So I nodded and said hi, but he just stared forward, walks past me, getting about as close as 3 or so meters away, towards the door in which I entered, opens it and walks through it and shuts it behind him. I didn't think anything of it. Maybe he didn't see me or something. I forget and carry on through the museum and come across a staff member who's there to share information about the Spitfire that was parked there. We start talking, and I mention the guy in uniform about where he went. To this he responds, "We don't have anyone here that does that sort of thing. Are you sure you saw correctly?" I started doubting myself at that point, and yet again just forgot about it. A while later, I'm told by a friend that the hangar is supposedly haunted. I mention the uniformed guy I saw, and she just freezes and says no way. She still doesn't believe me and thinks I'm making it up. Thinking back, it kind of creeps me the fuck out. I haven't previously experienced anything like that before. What do you think? Okay, so this is what happened. I started meditating to a binaural beat, and I only set my alarm for 25 minutes. The closed eye visuals I was starting to get were fairly intense. I've never before closed my eyes and had visuals this clear through meditation before. And then my alarm goes off, so I quickly turned it off and lay down, continuing to meditate. This is where it starts to get really intense. About an hour into the meditation, it felt like magnets were pulling my head from side to side, and then what felt like invisible cords going through my ears, down my throat, and something felt attached to the back of my head, and then what felt like little spiders running around my ears on both sides of my head. I could actually feel the center of my brain. It was making a chugging sound, and I could genuinely feel it. I started having pretty insane visuals when all of a sudden, I started feeling these orgasmic tingles go up my back. Every time I would get a burst of these tingles, I would feel the top half of my astral body start to wiggle from side to side, like I was about to astral project. But my intuition was telling me there was another presence or entity. I didn't have a clue what any of these symptoms were at the time. I just continued meditating when all of a sudden I forgot everything about myself. I said to myself in my head, "Who am I?" And that's when I opened my eyes, kinda, because I just felt a touch of fear. When I opened my eyes, the only lighting in my room was my speaker light, so it was pretty dark, but I could still see most things. There were two shadows dancing in the corner of my room in a very weird way. They were only small, like hip-height shadows, with arms and legs, but they looked like they were 100% there, I swear. I continued to watch them in awe when I noticed a human-sized black figure leaning out of the cupboard at the end of my bed, looking around my room. This one was not a shadow, it was 3D. After watching these things for a few minutes, I walked to the lounge room where my brother was sleeping on the couch and told him everything I had just experienced, leaving out the parts about me hallucinating because I didn't want him thinking I was mental. As I was explaining what I experienced during the meditation, I was looking outside the glass back door, and there was this gremlin-looking creature about hip height just staring me right in the eye. And there was no shadow. This was complete 3D. It was just bobbing back and forth. So I approached the door, and as I got to it, the creature just faded away in a way I can't explain. As I get outside, there's another shadow the same size, doing the same weird dance type thing that the shadow was doing in my room. The weird thing was that this shadow was dancing in front of the Buddha statue we have outside, enough for me not to be able to recognize the Buddha behind it. Completely mind-blowing for me because I had no clue about what was happening. When I returned to my bedroom, I wasn't hallucinating anymore. A few nights before all of that happened, just as I went to bed, I felt something decent size run onto my chest. So out of instinct, I smacked it as hard as I could. And what do you know? It's a wolf spider about 30 meters long from leg to leg. That all happened about 2 weeks ago. Last night, I went to my mate's for a catch-up, and I have a bunch of stuff in his shed from when I moved house and had nowhere else to fit it. I thought I'd just go have a suss at what I still had in there. I opened the door, and it's absolutely infested with redback spiders, like big fat ones everywhere, and it was only my stuff in the shed. Probably has nothing to do with this, but there is a chance. Tonight, when I did my meditation after having a bit of a break because of the intense hallucinations I previously experienced, I had the same feelings like spiders were crawling all over me, so I stopped the meditation early, just to be safe. Even after I stopped, it felt like there were spiders in my hair, on my legs and arms. I kept checking to make sure none of them were real, when bam, I find a spider, I don't know what type, crawling up my leg. I quickly took pictures to make sure it wasn't a hallucination. I know it sounds like utter bullcrap, but I swear none of this is a lie. I'm self-aware and honest as they come. I go outside for a smoke and start rereading a similar post on Reddit that mentions the spider feelings through meditation, when right behind where my phone is pointing, a redback starts to make its way to the floor from the bottom of a chair. And then a few minutes later, when I was standing near the back door, another small spider comes down from the roof right in front of me. I don't know what type of spider. So I put my hand out for it to land on, and as soon as it touched my hand, it quickly climbed back up its web to the roof. I know it sounds absolutely crazy, and I'm very aware it could just be a massive coincidence, but pretty creepy still, especially the one climbing up my leg after meditation. What do people suggest I do? Any advice would be great. This happened around 2007. I was 16 at the time, and some girlfriends and I decided to make our own Ouija board. It was the weekend, and we decided to take it to the grounds at the local high school instead of doing it in my friend's house. Thank God we at least had that sense. We set up and had the glass upside down with all of our pinky fingers on top. It moved, but I can't remember if or what it spelled. I've also felt skeptical about this before because you never really know if someone is just moving the glass. But all three of us agreed that we weren't manipulating it. While we were performing our little seance, there's a kid, 16, male, playing basketball within our sight. One of my friends recognized him and said his little brother, aged 10, died within the last year or so. The strange thing was this boy was alone and just shooting hoops. But over near one of the buildings was a kid about 10 years old just watching him. The boy played basketball by himself for a while and then left, never interacting with the younger boy. But the 10-year-old followed him when he left, but from a distance and still never actually interacting. My friends and I finished up and I went home later that afternoon. I was sleeping alone in my room that night when I woke up with my eyes still closed, and I could hear what I could describe as children's music. It was like the music that's one of those old music boxes and plays a melody when it's opened. I opened my eyes, and what I saw scared the absolute hell out of me. Right next to my bed, standing over me, was a completely black silhouette about the size of a 10-year-old boy. I was so afraid all I could manage to do was shut my eyes and just lay there, eventually rolling over to face the wall and cover myself in blankets while I silently cried. I managed to fall asleep again at some point and woke up in the safety of daylight. It never visited me again, and I'm not sure if it was the boy or if it was something else in that shape. I've never done another Ouija board. Fuck that. And I think it scared me so much I don't know if I'll be able to see a spirit again. My mum told me when I was young, 3 or 4, that I would tell her my late grandfather would sit on the end of my bed and make me feel good, in a loving family way. So I know I have the capability to speak to people from the spirit world. I just think about what happened that night, and I was so terrified, I think I may have a blockage now to protect me from ever feeling so afraid again. I was walking down the street with my friend at night, not so late, about 9 p.m. As I was walking, I saw a very normal woman with her medical mask on, in her 30s or 40s, from afar walking towards the opposite direction, which is my direction. As she came closer, she started looking at me and staring. It seemed weird, but I brushed it off. As we were passing by, I just glimpsed at her and walked by. And as I turned my head to my friend to continue our conversation, she grabs me by my arms and looks at me dead in the eye, with a very scary look on her face that I can't get out of my head. Her eyes were wide open, as if she was looking through me. But the way she was looking at me was as if she was very scared about something. She told me with a shivering voice, "Run!" I was weirded out and was like, "What?" She repeated herself as she was holding my arms. With the shiver in her voice, I could hear the fear in her voice and see the fear in her eyes. She looked very worried about me, then kept repeating, "Run, you're in danger. Run, be careful out there." But then my friend pulled me away from her and told me not to look at her and continue walking. My friend thought that she knew me or something because of the way she was talking to me. I was traumatized. My friend told me to brush it off, and that she may be cuckoo or something, because there are a lot of weird people that walk the streets here. But she wasn't one of those. First, it wasn't that late at night. And second, she seemed like a very normal person that was dressed very decently and looked decent. I still can't get it out of my head. Anyone have an idea what this might mean? My friend Dave and his brother Dan were driving home to Arizona from visiting friends in Illinois On October 24th this year, they entered the state of Kansas early AM, before sunrise. Both confirm this story. They first started to notice a town that they appeared to pass by repeatedly. A small farming town to the left, and identical cement, not metal, grain silo to the right. Same town to the left, same silo to the right. This exact town passed by at least 3 times, possibly 4 or 5. A thick fog rolled in, and ice started building on the car. A sheen of ice eventually covered the entire surface and made icicles on the antennae. When they stopped for gas after this experience, no other car had this shell of ice. The oddest part, however, was when they noticed around 10 AM that it was still pitch black. The sun didn't rise until a couple hours after that, very gradually eliminating the fog and melting the ice on the car. Here's one from my youth. My childhood best friend's dad had a workshop in the garage, and he'd put one of those old GE clock radios up on his beer/soda fridge out there, the kind everyone had back in the 80s. My friend's dad was a bit older. He was on his second marriage when he and his wife had my friend, and he was about 42 when my friend was born. So his music tastes were in the 50s/60s range. He always had the thing tuned to the AM oldie station when he worked. One night while my friend and I are having a sleepover, we're sleeping in sleeping bags in the den next to the garage. And about 3 AM, we both get awakened by this loud, blaring, staticky and distorted rendition of Sleepwalk by Santo and Johnny. Now, this is kind of a haunting song anyway, but at 3 AM out of nowhere, when it rouses you from a dead sleep, before we realise too much, my friend's dad comes out and asks if we turned it on. We didn't. He goes out and turns it off. The next memory I have is going out when we were watching movies, and I only left the door open for light from the house. I didn't turn the garage lights on. I grab a couple sodas, and once again, Sleepwalk comes on. Once again, it's garbled, staticky, and distorted. I reach up to turn it off, but the thing is, the radio is already off. I had to flick the power switch on and off. A few weeks later, my friend and I were playing driveway basketball late into a summer night, and we came in to sit down and cool off on lawn chairs, and wouldn't you know it, Sleepwalk again. This happened several more times. It was always Sleepwalk by Santo and Johnny. It's always garbled, always distorted. We'd turn it off and go on with our lives. The last straw came when I was sneaking off with one of the neighbourhood girls I had a crush on, trying to put some adolescent moves on her. I was doing alright until fucking Sleepwalk. Not wanting to miss my opportunity, I unplugged it, and it didn't stop. In fact, it got louder. The girl and I both bolted from the garage. We came back in with my friend and his then girlfriend and showed them the damn unplugged cord. My friend was like, okay, I'm telling my dad. And as soon as he said that, it stopped. We went and told his dad anyway, who didn't believe us. One day, a few weeks later, I came over and found the clock radio smashed and sitting in the trash can. I asked my friend what happened. He told me how he and his dad were working on his mom's car one night, and that damn song came on again. His dad tried to change the station, and nothing happened. He tried to turn it off, and that didn't help. Then he tried to unplug it, and it got louder again. So my friend's dad grabbed a hammer and smashed it to quit working. I'd love to have a really great ending, like the radio turned back on top of the fridge the next day. But no. It went to the dump and we never heard from it again. But to this day, I can't hear that song, not even a few seconds of it. And it doesn't scare the living hell out of me. One night about 5 years ago, Some friends and I were celebrating a birthday party. It was late December and quite cold. The weather was very misty that night as well. I was having a good time, and my buddy asked if I wanted to stay over for the night, since we were all going to be getting drunk. I said sure. I wasn't drunk yet, and some friends who showed up later had asked to head to my house to pick up some of their stuff. So me and the three girls went to my place. I lived in a dark back corner of the neighbourhood that bordered vast fields of property. Driving up to my house, we rounded a corner and passed a ditch. Remember this. I get out with one of my friends as we were literally walking to my room, grabbing clothes. She grabs some of her video games and we both leave. When we walk out of my house, dogs from all over the neighbourhood are barking like crazy. It sounded like hell, still making me shudder to this day. My friend and I looked at each other and noticed the house across the street. Behind the house was the field, and behind it was a massive light illuminating the back of the house. Ignoring that, we walked to my friend's car where the other two girls were. I tapped her window and she rolled it down. I asked if she could turn her car off real quick. She did. Without saying anything, her face went blank. I asked if she could hear all the dogs, and she said yes. We listened for around 5 more seconds when the howling and barking ceased at once, in unison. Nothing, no sound at all. We got scared, hopped in the car, and we drove off. We all felt like something odd that night, but didn't know. I asked them something that could possibly give me a rational explanation to calm me down. I wish I hadn't. I asked if they had seen another dog walking around making them mad, or maybe a flock of birds riling up the dogs. They both said no, and I believed them. It was only 2 minutes' time they were sitting outside my house. My friend piped up later and said she saw something when we passed the ditch going to my house. I asked what she saw. She described a sort of diamond that was changing shape, floating down the ditch. It was retaining a geometrical form, but shifting to different shapes. It floated down the ditch. I knew that ditch led to a runoff that went to the fields behind the neighbourhood. There was nothing we could do. We left and haven't spoken of it since. I had just graduated and would do yard work and clean up a lot inside of my house. I knew some of the neighbourhood kids and they would tell me some odd stuff they witnessed around there. They would see lights in the sky, their dogs barking up at trees, people standing on roofs. No one was ever hurt, but some strange things happened there. I was in France with my family in the southern countryside in 2019, on holiday in the summer. I won't drag on with boring details, but we were staying in a 2-story villa with a swimming pool that was enclosed by hedges on 3 sides, with a gap in one of the hedges to go back to the house, and a fire pit just outside the house. Every night, we had to put a pool cover over the pool to stop leaves and whatnot from getting in. My dad told me it was my turn to put the pool cover on, as he had done it the 2 nights previously, and I just finished unspooling the cover and dragging it across the pool very slowly. After I had finished, I was admiring the view from the poolside across the well-lit French terrain. It was around 6, when my eyes dashed to the quick movement. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. I could see it running out of our neighbour's garden. Imagine a hairless dog with no head or defined paws, no mouth, eyes, or visible orifices. It had a skin tone like a white person, and it moved in bounding leaps, as a dog does at full sprint, but without the grace. It looked like a lot of skin-toned fleshy cartilage, very smooth and without contour. It was about waist height of an average man from what I could see. I could see its stump, where a head should be on a dog, pointing diagonally up straight ahead of it, which didn't move while it was running. I had a clear side/above view for about 3 or 4 long seconds, before logic kicked in, and I realised that if it sensed I was there, I could be in possible danger. I was 15 at the time. I've always had perfect vision, and there was absolutely nothing obscuring it. I'm a skeptic, and even I couldn't justify what I had seen. My whole family didn't believe me, and basically called me crazy or tired, but I was wide awake and I know what I saw. Plus, our other neighbour's dogs, who were kept about a mile in the direction it was running, started barking later at about 8. Then we heard dogs barking further off in the distance at around 9. I talked to my neighbour directly opposite our villa, and she said she had no dogs. I talked to the neighbour with dogs about a mile up the road, and he said he hadn't seen anything. This happened over 3 years ago, but I can't get over it because of how strange it was. I'm not sure if what happened can be classified as an encounter, or sleep paralysis, or even a simple dream that involved moderate amounts of sleepwalking. I had had 2 occurrences of sleep paralysis before this. I was at one of my family homes and was sleep deprived that day, having barely slept around 4 hours the night before, which was mostly due to some late night porn streaming and masturbating. It was around 2 in the afternoon, and my parents had left for some place until that evening. They had asked me to stay in their bedroom while they were gone, since it contained a lot of valuables belonging to them, so that they could feel more secure. They told me to take a nap in their room itself while I was at it. I slept on the right side of their big bed. A wide window around 4 feet away from that side wasn't curtained, and the sun was shining brightly. This is sort of a rather large farmhouse, which is walled from all sides, so the area outside the window is also a part of the property. I went to sleep and had a dream involving myself visiting an apartment complex that supposedly belonged to one of my mother's younger friends, not in real life. I went there alone, or maybe one of my friends had tagged along, as we visited this young lady's place. She was rather beautiful, and was asking me about how my mother's been and how's everything. After a few pleasantries, we took leave and said bye. While we were on the road, the dream ended. One of the visual images from that dream that I still remember was how lonely the way back was. It was extremely sunny and hot, so everyone was staying inside. And the cement on the road was reflecting the sunlight brightly, and there were barely any greens around. There was no other person or vehicle in sight. Her apartment complex from a distance seemed normal and just sunny in general, but uninhabited in the sense that everyone was inside. This is the point where everything gets confusing. I woke up and saw 3 ugly and demonic looking hags standing next to me, on the right side of the bed, that is. They were dark black or bluish in appearance, and had terrifyingly large disproportionate teeth, which resembled a wild beast's face more than that of a vampire. They were all angry at me and shouting and wailing, or even crying maybe. The one in the middle, who was probably their leader, addressed me and accused me of killing her son. I was frozen from fear maybe, or just because it was a sleep paralysis event after all. The 3 of them put their clawed hands on my body and started pushing me to the left. When I had rolled for more than 90 degrees, I woke up for real this time, in case it was a sleep paralysis event, or I gained control of my body and the apparitions disappeared, in case it was an actual encounter. Either way, I had actually rolled my body to the side and was sweating profusely. Barely able to move because of how scared I still was, I mustered up some courage and reached for my phone to the right on the bedside stool and called my father. I tried to explain what had happened and broke down and started crying. I remember telling him that some witches had visited me. He told me to get a grip of myself and consoled me, telling me since I was the most non-religious in my family, to not let such things affect my reasoning. Once the call had ended, I was still sleepy and my body wanted to sleep again so badly. I forced myself to get up and get out of that room. fearing that those witches, ghosts, demons might get a hold of my body again. It was around 3:30 or 4 then, indicating that I hadn't slept for long at all. I didn't visit my parents' room for a long time after that had happened, and also generally avoided sleeping in the afternoon, for a year or two at least. I should also mention that I had some guilt of masturbating the night before, since in my culture, it's not viewed as something that's ideal, and I had felt that I was wasting my time away looking up for porn like that every night. Another theory that I came up with was that past lives may be real, and I may have somehow killed that demon woman's son in one of my past lives, and that the girl whom I visited in her apartment complex in that dream may have been what that woman looked like when she was human. After her son's death, she may have been looking for vengeance upon me in my current life, and that visit to my place through that window to terrify me was her form of revenge. Or, whatever I just mentioned may have just been a dream, coupled with a sleep paralysis event where my body moved as a reaction to what was happening in my dream or sleep paralysis. Whatever it was pretty disturbing, and I'm looking for any answers here. To preface, my dad was a staunch believer in UFOs, aliens, anything paranormal. He figured we, my two younger brothers and I, needed to know about this stuff, so he told us all kinds of stories growing up. It scared the shit out of all of us, and still affects us to this day. We're all in our 30s now. When I was in my late teens or early 20s, I lived with my dad. He lived in a trailer that was 3 bedrooms. I smoked cigarettes at the time, and the rule was that I was allowed to smoke in the living room at night, but not in my room because the smoke would make it to his room and wake him up. That's important for later. He had built a 3-way bunk bed for us that was still in the house. The middle bunk faced out from the other 2, and there was about 3 to 4 feet space under it. That was my bunk. It was situated in such a way that if I was laying on my back, the door was directly behind my head with just enough room for the door to close. I hope I'm painting the picture right. Anyway, one night I'm watching TV in my room. It's late, so I turn everything off and lay down to sleep. I don't recall how long until I heard the noises. I begin to hear what sounds like footsteps go up the hallway behind me, back and forth, back and forth. Then, light tapping on the walls along with the footsteps. Then they stop directly behind me in the doorway to my bedroom. Then I hear something run into my room and under my bed. To say I was terrified is an understatement. I wanted my dad awake, but was too scared to yell or anything like that. So I grabbed my pack of cigarettes from the TV stand that was close enough to the bed I didn't have to move much. I lit up and started blowing the smoke into the hallway. Luckily, my dad woke up yelling at me for smoking in my room. The next day, I explained why I smoked in my room, and he was fine with it, but didn't understand why I was scared. That was my dad, though. To this day, I can still remember that night, like it was yesterday. "12 years ago, I met my wife. She was a very close family, and I was welcomed in by most of them pretty quickly. We would spend a lot of time at one of her sister's houses when we wanted to hang out. On one visit, the whole family was over having dinner. The sister that lived in the house said something about the guy in the garage keeping her up all night, with his tools banging around. Everyone empathized and just kept eating. I asked what they were talking about. They said the previous owner of the house was an older guy that spent most of his time in the garage, working on his vehicles. One time, there was some kind of explosion and he died in an ambulance on his way to the hospital. Now, they can hear him in the garage most nights, working on things. I figured they were pulling my leg since I was new to the family. My wife's brother-in-law, whose house it was, said the guy had a problem with men. He always messed with the men of the family, but not the women. Her brother then told a story about a night he was watching TV pretty late. It was past midnight, and no one else was awake. Out of nowhere, the TV volume went all the way up, then back down. Then the TV turned off, then back on again. The remote, he said, was across the room. At that point, he decided to walk home. I still just figured they were messing with me. Fast forward a few months. I was having some issues at home, so I asked if I could crash on their couch for a few days. One of those nights, I was up watching TV. It was probably 2 or 3 in the morning. I kept hearing sounds from the area of the garage, but that's where the heater and water heater are located, so I chalked it up to that. I was laying on my side on the couch watching who knows what. As anyone who's ever watched TV like that knows, when the commercials come on, you flip to face the back of the couch to give your neck a rest. On one of those couch-facing flips, I heard a voice that sounded like it was right next to me, whisper into my ear, say, "Go to sleep," quite sternly. I'm not one to screw around with things like that, so without turning around, I grabbed the remote, turned off the TV, closed my eyes, and tried my best to fall asleep. The next morning, I was telling them about it. They just had the "I told you so" face on. I've slept there since, many times, but never again on the couch. And if I ever start to hear him working in the garage, I know it's bedtime. When I was 6 years old, my mother, twin brother, and I lived in a haunted house. We would always experience weird shit. Long story short, late one night while in bed, twin brother and I slept in the same bed. I'm not sure what time it was, other than all the lights were off. It was pitch black. My mother was asleep in the room down the hall, and my twin brother was asleep beside me. My closet door opened up, and a presence came from the opened door. I couldn't see it, but I felt it. I felt it the same way I felt my brother laying next to me. It was very real. I couldn't see it, but I remember feeling the thing. It was extremely gentle. I felt myself being guided out of bed and led into the closet. I didn't question, just simply followed and obeyed. This entire experience was completely absent of fear, so I had no desire to run or scream or anything like that. Anyway, I entered the dark closet and the door gently closed behind me. Still, no fear. I stood there alone, in the dark. Then suddenly, all of these cartoon-like figures began to appear in front of me. Some of them had small, tiny eyes, others had great big eyes. Some had funny faces, others no face at all, only floating eyes. They were trying to interact with me by making funny faces, and I felt really comfortable and at ease. Again, I was only 6 years old at the time, so I was really amused with what I was experiencing. While I was still in the closet with the funny faces, things turned dark. The funny faces disappeared, almost as though they were frightened away or perhaps making a clearing for something much darker to make itself known. I remember not being able to move. I remember my shoulders being tightly grabbed, and this thing appeared directly in front of me and opened its mouth. When it did, this super long tongue came creeping out. It shoved its way into my own mouth and down my throat. At that moment, I blacked out. I woke up the next day in my bed. I have no idea or have no memory as to how I got there. I've been fascinated with sex ever since. I never uttered a word to my brother or my mother about the experience. Anyway, things had gotten so bad in the house, we were forced to move out in a hurry. My mom didn't want to take one single thing with us. She just wanted to get out and fast. We moved in with my grandmother, whom we had lived with for the next several years. At the age of 40, I'm 43 now, I finally told my mom what I had experienced in that house. She broke down and cried. I feel that the entity left something in me, a dark seed. I have a very unhealthy appetite for sex, and I feel things. I also feel people. Needless to say, I'm very cautious about where I go, and very selective of the friends I keep. Sometimes, the weight of it all gets very, very heavy. So this happened to me when I was a kid, probably around 7 or 8 years old at school. During a lesson one day, I needed to use the bathroom. The toilets were basically at the other end of the school from where my class was at the time. I always got kind of creeped out when I had to walk through the school corridors during lesson time. Since sound didn't really travel from the classrooms, so you were on your own walking through these dead, silent, echoey corridors, it just freaked me out. After walking past all the classrooms, you had to go through another set of doors to get to the next corridor, where the toilets were located. As soon as I went through these doors, I could hear this music. A slow, scratchy guitar that echoed and reverbed with a low beat. It seemed to be coming from my right, which was the door to the main hall where we would have assembly in PE, just opposite the toilet's entrance. Often, you'd walk past and you'd hear a class doing PE, but not this time. I looked to see the door was open and couldn't see anyone in there. The music was kind of freaking me out, so I poked my head around the door to see where it was coming from. I saw one of the distinctive sideways prism-shaped cassette players our school had, often used for music during assemblies and stuff, plugged into the power outlet on the left of the door, just playing this music to itself. No sign of anyone around in the hall. I looked up and down the corridor, still no sign of anyone. Unsettled as I was at this point, I really needed to use the bathroom, and knew I'd probably get in trouble if I got caught snooping about the school during lesson time. So I went to the bathroom. While I'm in there, I could still faintly hear this music, and just as I'm finishing up, the music starts to fade, then disappears. I come out of the bathroom to see the main hall door is still open, and there's still no sign of anyone in there. I poke my head around the door again to see nobody there, but the cassette player is now gone. I look up and down the corridor again, and there's still no sign of anyone around. Bear in mind, the time between me hearing the music fade and me coming out of the bathroom is probably about a second or two. Weirded me out big time, especially as an 8-year-old. I power walked back to class, told a few friends, but I don't think any of them really believed me. Didn't really think much about it until 2013. I was around 20 years old at this point, when I was following the Cicada 3301 phenomenon. Part of the ARG puzzle whatever Cicada 3301 was a piece of music called the Instar Emergence. Now I can't say for sure that this was the song I heard that day, since I don't remember the exact tune, but upon hearing it for the first time, it instantly reminded me of the music I heard that day, and freaked me out all over again. If this isn't the song I heard, it can at least give you an idea of what it sounded like, especially the latter half. I still don't really know what to make of this whole thing, but the more I listen to that song, the more I'm convinced that's what I heard that day, but I'll probably never be sure. The song hasn't been identified as existing publicly outside of Cicada, but I somehow doubt a Cicada 3301 member walked into a school with their music on a cassette tape to mess with some random kid in 2001. Anybody have any ideas what might have happened here? So I wake up in the middle of the night, but I'm not anywhere. It's just void. And then I feel this something. I can't explain what it was. Trying to tell me something, but couldn't unless I allowed it to. It felt wrong to let whatever that was tell me what it wanted. My instincts told me not to. Then it started manifesting itself in the form of unanimated objects, people, a thought, anything. Kind of like trying to convince me to let it tell me, but I never complied. Then from this point on, I was aware of my own body and was conscious, but at the same time I was somewhere else. I'm sure it wasn't a dream, it didn't feel like one. So in the other place I first woke up in this wooden house, in a bed right in front of a door that was never opened or used in this house. I don't know how I knew this, I just did. The door just led to the outside if opened. But this time, the door was poorly closed, and one of the lower corners broken. I immediately told someone it had to be fixed ASAP, feeling extremely worried about this for some reason. Next thing I remember, I'm in some kind of line waiting for some guy who was sitting at a table writing something. I couldn't make out exactly what it was. Sometimes he wrote letters and sometimes musical notes, so I don't know if it was like a song or something alike. While I was waiting, I looked down to my shirt and it had a name sewn on it. Alexis, not my name. And then when I reached the front of the line, I read it again on my shirt, and the guy says the name out loud and starts writing this stuff. So close to the table was standing a woman, and separate from her, but also close, there was a kid. Then all of a sudden I started feeling this dread from the guy at the table, the woman and the kid. There were more people. And started feeling the something I mentioned before, trying to reach in again. I left that place and came into an empty house with 4 more people that were talking about how tired they also were of that something, trying to tell them whatever it wants to say. After this, I'm only in my real body at last, and instantly I remembered the grandmother of a friend. She's alive, and started shaking and crying uncontrollably, without an apparent reason, and wherever I was before had no relation with her that I know of. During this whole process where my real body felt hot and I was sweating, like room temperature, not like a fever, and just when I could regain control of myself with the crying, I was no longer hot and came to the realization that my thoughts were completely mine once again. I later looked up and the temperature that night was 21 degrees, so it wasn't hot at all. The experience would have been fascinating if it wasn't for the fact that the whole time I felt like I was in danger while my consciousness was divided. So I texted my friend right away, as it was his grandmother that triggered my crying, to see if he could reach her and see if everything was okay, and told him everything with detail. When I got to the part of his grandmother, I started crying without control again. And here's what made me be completely sure that this wasn't a dream. He told me where I first woke up, I described the room to him, was exactly as the room he used to sleep in at his grandparents' house in another town since he was a kid. Even the broken bit of the door, and he was going to go visit that very same day. Later that day, he texted me again that when he was just about to leave, a worker from the electricity corporation went to his house, talking about a problem with the wiring in the houses of the vicinity. Then he excuses himself to call someone on his cell phone and greeted the person he called as Alexis. My friend also told me that his mother and grandmother had something whisper to them before, even though what I sensed wasn't something audible or visible. I just perceived it in a way I can't explain. This is a story that my mother and aunt told me when I was in high school. I'm 21 now, and it's never left me. I think about it constantly and ponder over what happened. My grandfather passed close to a year ago in June of 2020. He was 96 when he died, and it caused some issues in my family. They don't really pertain to the story, but there are some things about him that I have to share in order to explain the story in the best way. My grandfather, John, was a man who was extremely calloused and old-fashioned. He was bitter, abusive, and a complete macho man. My mother was raised on never showing emotion or pain due to his abuse and lack of compassion for others. He was also an extreme racist. He had many secrets in my family that are now coming to light after his death. Everything that happened around him was brushed off and forgotten because he had more important things to do, like drinking and having affairs. Just an overall intense and very no-nonsense type of man. He wasn't religious at all and found things like faith and hope stupid. This story takes place in the 70s, most likely early to mid 70s. My mom was born in 1965 and remembers this story clearly. My aunts as well remember this happening, but no one knows exactly what year. One summer day, John decided to take his family on a small outing with the intent to have a picnic in the woods. My mother, her three sisters, and her mother, my grandmother, were all there and very excited about this. Where we're from, my family is more accustomed to the woods and has lived in this area for generations. Going into the woods for a fun family activity was nothing out of the ordinary and seemed to be just another normal day. They made their way down a dirt backwoods road and stopped once they found a clearing large enough to accommodate them. As all the kids started jumping out the car and messing around as kids do after being stuck together, my grandmother began unloading their food and picnic supplies. John began surveying the area and deciding where to set up. As he was doing that, something in the woods past the clearing caught his eye. Before going to see what was out there, he yelled to the family and said he would be right back. The kids and my grandmother thought not much of this, since they were all used to the woods, and these woods in particular were very familiar to them. They continued unloading and setting up the stuff they brought. One of the girls pointed out something in the clearing that caused a sudden shift from a normal day to something far worse. It was a dirt mound that looked like something was buried underneath it. The mound was about the size of a small person, maybe even child-sized. It was too big to simply be any animal in these woods. There was nothing but squirrels and raccoons in the area. Scattered amongst the mound were larger river rocks. There was no pattern, but they were definitely placed on the mound intentionally. Also, the dirt seemed to be fresh, as though just buried. It was loose and slightly darker than the area around it. The mood immediately shifted from an average day in the woods to something much darker. My grandmother became concerned and told the girls to stay away from it. She was clearly upset and worried about it, but did her best to ignore it. The girls, all being children, didn't have the same amount of worry and continued playing while just avoiding the mound. They tried to return to their picnic, and the girls were already chasing each other in circles again. It was supposed to be a joyous, sunny day, and my grandmother wanted to keep it that way. Things seemed to return to normal for a beat. The trees around them created a wall of dense foliage, blocking their view from anything inside the forest. One of the girls again took notice of something strange. It was immediately clear what it was. Along one of the long branches of the tree hung a noose. It was tied with rope and hung high above their heads. A lump of dirt can be explained away by nature, but someone had to have placed the noose there. My grandmother stopped dead in her tracks when she saw it. Something was wrong. Very wrong. They couldn't just pack up and leave. John was still out in the woods. Even children can recognize a noose as a symbol of death. The children started to become very anxious. Whatever innocence was keeping them from worrying about the mound had completely vanished. My grandmother, the resilient woman she is, soothed her children and told them it was just left by deer hunters. But she knew in her heart they needed to leave. No deer hunter would hang a deer and then bury it. At least no sane deer hunter. It wasn't until they started hearing something in the woods that they started to really panic. My grandmother, as well as all the children, began hearing a rhythmic chanting from deep in the woods. It sounded as though there were a group of people all singing in deep voices to the beat of the drum. It went in a quick bum 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 pattern. 3 steady beats followed by a pause, and then it would repeat. It sounded far away, but immediately fear began to take hold of each one of them. They each listened and gathered together. As the seconds passed, it began to increase in volume. It was getting not just louder, but closer. What started out as a distant echo soon began to engulf the entire clearing. My grandmother was terrified and wanted so desperately to leave, but John had yet to return. They waited, fear-ridden, as the sound began to fill their chests. It felt like they were at a concert as the deep bass began to vibrate in their chest. It was everywhere and constant, as though the sound was being made by the trees themselves, surrounding the family in every direction. Suddenly, the sound of yelling broke through the constant drone of chanting. John's voice was yelling out at them from the trees. "Go," he yelled. "Get in the car!" He came running out of the woods, yelling that they needed to leave. They had never seen terror on this man as they had at this moment. He was a man afraid of nothing, unbothered by the world around him. This was the most emotion any of them had ever seen from him. He saw something in those woods, something that shook his very being to the core. My grandmother began throwing everything in the back of the car as the kids got in as well. John and my grandmother picked up their things and as quickly as possible threw it all in the car. They had no care for the things they were packing up due to their fear. Food was all over the trunk and items were broken. After everything was tossed in, they both got in the car and drove away. This is where the main grunt of the story ends. But one fact from this story is what really has caused me to wonder all these years. My grandfather refused to ever speak of what he saw. He never told any of the children or my grandmother. Every time it was brought up, he quickly rebuffed it and angrily told them not to ask again. He never went to the police or told anyone outside of the family. My grandfather is the only person who knows what happened that day. When I first heard the story, I swore to myself I would ask him one day. Now I can't and regret it greatly. By the time I was in high school, he had moved out of state with other family members, and I mostly lost contact with them outside of occasional happy birthday calls or letters. The story doesn't have an answer to go with it. When he died, the only thing I was sad about was never knowing what happened that day. We weren't close when I got older, and once I learned of all the abuse he caused, I separated myself from him. His death looms over me, and this story still haunts me to this day. My mother and aunts just look back on it as a spooky memory from their childhood. Nothing more than a story to spook the little ones at Thanksgiving with. I'm one of the only people in the family who's still curious about what happened. In the summer of 1985, I was at Azalea Trails Girl Scout camp in the San Gorgonio mountain pass. My group's leader had moved us from our original campsite one night into a clearing in the forest. We slept in camping bags and had a campfire that night. My girlfriend and I woke first the next morning, so we were the only ones awake when this happened. Note, she asked me about my recollection later while we were reunited in junior college. I guessed to see if mine matched hers. It did. Within minutes, there was a light pink craft hovering directly above us, silently circling the clearing. It was dome-shaped and flared out at the bottom. It was so close that I could see its silver shiny windows and lights below it. I had the distinct feeling that whatever was inside was cognizant of us watching. We didn't think to grab a camera or wake the others. I think we were stupefied, transfixed. We watched for about 20 minutes. Then something even stranger happened next. The pink craft left as silently as it appeared, and from the space it flew into, we saw, way above, another craft shooting out of the morning sky. We thought it was going to crash as we watched it just fly or fall into the forested area to our right, so we hunkered down, put our hands over our heads, and got ready for impact. But nothing happened. Nothing. It was shaped completely different than the first time, like a puffy jet plane. It was silvery, sparking like it was made out of lights. It was then that the rest of the kids woke up. When I got home from camp, I learned that my maternal grandfather had died. And try as I might to get my parents to listen to me about this incident, they were pretty distracted. I must have been talking about it a lot though, as I remember my mom having a private talk with me about keeping the story to myself, that other people wouldn't understand. Since then, I've started my own family and every member has a UFO story. They seem to follow us. Ever since I was a small child, weird things constantly happen to me, at least a few times every year, to the point where it's a running joke between all of my friends. I'm 23 now, and usually brush these things off as just me attracting weird energy. But as of lately, when I don't feel like I'm going crazy as I often do, I've been feeling like I'm on the verge of discovering something about myself. A spiritual awakening of sorts, but I don't know where to go from there. I recently even took a shot in the dark and got a well-reviewed but generic card reading to try to help myself gain some clarity about my situation. And I did get very impressive cards for my spirituality category. But I don't know where to go from here, or if I even actually believe in card readings. I'm just desperate for any help I can get. Here are a few examples of things that have happened to me from what I can remember. My earliest memory is one of being at a supermarket, sitting in the baby toddler seat of my grandma's shopping cart. She was turned around in the fresh vegetable section, adding veggies to a bag, when I suddenly had a panicked shiver run down my spine, feeling like someone might try to hurt me. I then saw a gruff-looking man across the aisles in a leather jacket with a braided ponytail. He immediately walked over to me and very briefly tried to stick his finger in my mouth as he was walking by, before my grandma turned back around, but having already been heightened to the situation, I had kept my mouth firmly closed and turned my face away from him. To this day, I believe he might have been trying to drug me. Why, I have no idea, but this is my earliest childhood memory and first experience with a correct gut feeling or premonition. It scared me, and for some reason I felt ashamed, and I never told my grandmother. When I was a young girl, about 7 years old, I was laying in my great-grandmother's guest room while my family socialized in the living room. I was supposed to be taking a nap, but was instead just laying in bed, staring up at the ceiling fan as it spun on high. A blade from the ceiling fan suddenly shot off from the fan and hit the wall, leaving a mark in the paint. I got up and looked at the wall and at the blade on the floor and then started off to go tell my family what happened, but was met by them at the bedroom door checking on me because they had heard the loud voice. When I tried to show them where the blade was, it was gone, as was the mark on the wall, and when we turned the fan off, there was no missing blade. When I was about 10, my dad was in the local jail. My dad was in and out of jail my whole childhood and into my teen years, and I was asleep in my bed with my mom. I woke up singing the name Sean Apple, Sean Apple, Sean Apple, and my mom asked me why I was saying that and told me to please stop because I was freaking her out. I asked her who it was. My mom said that Sean Apple was one of my dad's crazy friends whom she didn't like. We found out the next day that at the moment I was repeating his name, he had died from banging his head against his jail cell wall. My dad's cell wall was next to his, and he had been screaming and screaming for the guards to help, but had been ignored. Other small examples from my daily life, especially lately, are seeing very bright, very brief flashes of light, hearing sounds of objects moving but not witnessing them moving, experiencing phantom smells such as burning, having a premonition about my dog dying when I wasn't aware she was sick. I lived in a different town as I am away at college, and very suddenly having vivid and unprovoked, very insignificant flashbacks from my childhood, called mind pops according to Google. 3 days ago, however, something disturbing happened to me that provoked my search for answers for these unexplainable things that happened to me. I got in my car to go to a job interview, and I found a considerably large section of my hair that was cleanly cut with scissors and pasted together with some kind of whitish greenish paste. I have absolutely no logical answer for how it got there. None. And yes, my car was locked. And no, I'm not a drunk, nor do I think I have a stalker or a prankster friend. Does anyone have any idea what's happening to me? Why do I attract such weird experiences? These are only a few examples. I have so many stories like these, and feel deeply like I experienced similar things as a child that I can't quite remember. I'm honestly starting to get scared that these situations are going to escalate, as there have also been strange instances seemingly not paranormal, such as once driving home from the grocery store. I live in a large city, and this particular drive is about 5 miles. Behind a car whom I followed all the way from the grocery store parking lot to my college housing, in which the car parked in my parking space, and when I cracked my window and yelled to ask what the fuck they were doing, the woman seemed disoriented, didn't say anything, and drove off. That was about 2 years ago. Unfortunately, at the time, we had a security guard I was able to alert of the situation and began to call to walk me inside at night. So this happened in 2019 in the Midwest. Around 9 a.m., a beautiful sunny day. I'm inside my room, cheery and excited to start the day. The sun is shining through a clean window, and today is the chore day. I was on a mission to organise some trivial things, nothing wild. Well rested, no stress, finally time to myself and organisation. I had an offer for an important project that would be held at the end of June, the biggest gathering of green energy, and I was invited to showcase my trashin, wearable art made from poorly discarded trash, mostly plastic bags. Because I was scouted from a previous project, smaller one, that I worked on. I'm in a good mood, I have a goal, I'm well rested, and the only drugs I could have done would be strong black tea and perhaps mouldy bread, none of which were even present. I'd lived in the place for about 7 years and there was absolutely nothing special about it. That's important as to what will come next. As I bend down, I hear something calling for my attention. I'm alone in my apartment. I froze with fear, but still looked over. Still in fear, I look from one corner of my eye and I see a face, about 3 feet from the ground. Oh shit. He looked very humanoid, with slightly larger features, the head and the eyes. A colour of smooth leather-like skin was lilac grey on a dim level. Small nose, long but thin-lipped mouth, smaller ears and large eyes. Still human eyes, none of that big black side ovals. No, this had human eyes, but they were different, very different. The whites of the eyes were a dark grey. The iris was well segmented and had a typical root-like formation, except it was grey-black and the pupil had no reflection. It became even stranger when somehow I got sucked into the pupil. He showed me the abyss, the true nothingness. It was both dark and light simultaneously. There was all and nothing in it. I wasn't looking at anything in particular, but any emotion, space, time, mass, it was gone. All was gone and all was obsolete. Then the being had talked to me, without moving a muscle. He said in my vibration of voice, "One day I'll take everything away from you." I had no annotations or any sign of emotion. It was a statement like a fact, not really threatening nor a warning, just is. I remember feeling powerless as the being, was way superior to mankind. Being so close to it made me feel incompetent. I then realized that the being held no experience with desire or fear, or any emotion or feeling. Then it left. Still, I'm in my sunny room, as if nothing happened. I looked around at my hands, and they were wet, covered in an electric-like field. I have no idea what it was, so I'm trying my best to explain it and what it looked like. This field around only my skin was colourful, bright, and moved like a current. It was so close to my skin, as if this was my second skin, and it moved until it too vanished. I still lived there, but I slept over at a friend's house that following night. I stopped working on the project early 2019 without any real reason to. In June 2020, it was cancelled. This story takes place when I was 8 years old, in Fort Myers, Florida, in a neighborhood called Heritage Farms. I'm stating the name and place in case anyone knows of the place or happens to live in that neighborhood. You never know. Pretty bad that I'm 40 years old, and this took place when I was 8. I still remember the address, and I still remember the phone number. I remember my parents looking at this house before they bought it. I remember me, my father, and the real estate agent being in the back bedroom, which would have been my parents' bedroom when we moved in. My mom decided to break away from the group and go into the other bedrooms, which would have been my brother and I's. I remember my mother running at full sprint to meet us in the back bedroom because she was scared. She later on told us that she got such a heavy feeling in those bedrooms that it felt like something was right behind her. She eventually let it go, and we eventually purchased the house, and we ended up moving in. Things didn't start getting freaky until about a year and a half after we purchased the house. But there was always a heavy, wet blanket feeling in the house, and the neighborhood was no better. I was terrified to go out and play. I was always picked on in the neighborhood, and the neighborhood was always dark. In that year and a half span from us moving in to us seeing the first thing, my dad lost his job, my parents started having problems, and I got worse as far as being scared to death to move in general. There was a certain point in time where you would begin walking, and then you'd feel like you'd have to run, like there was something in getting ready to get you at any second. My mom told me years and years later when I was an adult that she was washing dishes one day in broad daylight, and she saw a big black figure in the corridor that opened up to my room and my brother's room. But nobody knew about that. She kept it to herself. So, I guess you can say she was the first one to see anything in that house. But like I said, she didn't let me know until I was an adult. It all started in my bedroom, in my closet. I remember hearing what sounded like cards shuffling and music. I remember telling my mom I think there are cowboys in my closet, because that's the only thing I could relate to. I know now it sounded like a deck of cards being shuffled, and an old saloon piano being played. The sounds weren't up in the forefront, they sounded kind of distant. About a week that went on, then I started hearing the whispering. Everything from laughs and chuckles to full-on whispering conversations. Oftentimes I would hear, "Hey you." Needless to say, I was out of that bedroom after about a month. My brother was 17 at the time, and all he did was work and went out with his friends, so I slept in his bedroom. I know my first experience was on a Friday night, because I used to watch a grouping of shows when I was a kid called TGIF. It had Full House, Family Matters, and a couple of other shows that I can't remember, but I used to watch it every Friday night. 80s babies will know what I'm talking about. I remember all the lights in the house being turned off besides my parents in the back bedroom. My brother's bedroom and my bedroom were separated by a very long hallway which ended in my parents' bedroom. I remember getting a very creepy, sinking feeling, and I don't know what made me do this, but I peered around the door opening, and there it was. A big, black figure that was as tall as the doorway. It was silent and motionless. I remember pulling the covers over my head and being totally quiet. Then I heard our bathroom door, which led to the patio in the pool area, open and close. It was a metal door, so it made noise. When I heard that, I screamed bloody murder. My parents came in and got me, and I slept with them that night. I told my mom and dad that I saw a big black figure wearing a top hat and trench coat and had a round thing in its hand. I remember being terribly, terribly clingy after that. and I always slept with my parents. Until my dad got sick and tired of it. He said I didn't need anything, it was all my imagination. And I guess, according to my mother, she had told my dad I was telling the truth, because she had seen it too, but didn't say anything. I eventually had to start sleeping in my room again, but the whispering, the cards, and the music never stopped. Some nights I wouldn't have to sleep in my room, but 9 times out of 10, I would always choose to sleep in my brother's room, which had a director's chair next to the bed. I remember one night being petrified again for some reason, and I looked over at the director's chair, and there was a black figure sitting in the chair, and I screamed bloody murder again. And I remember my father having to pick me up out of the bed and walk me to the room. There was one incident where I was at school, and my brother was at school. My mom says she was making the bed in her bedroom, and she heard the garage door open and close. The doors opened and closed, and she heard, "Mom, I'm home." She called my brother, saying that she was in the back making her bed. Then she heard, "Mom, I'm home," again. She walked through the house and out to the garage and out to the driveway, and there was nobody there. She called my brother's high school, and she actually talked to him. I remember my mom sitting out on the curb of the house when I was walking home from the bus. That's how scared she was to go back in. The straw that broke the camel's back for my mom happened during the tea time. She was washing dishes in the kitchen, and hopefully I can explain this kitchen correctly, the design of it. The kitchen faced the 2 back bedrooms where I slept. You have an opening leading into the kitchen. Then you had a wall, kind of octagonal, and then another opening which led into the kitchen. My mom told me that she would always see clouds. She said they looked like the little wisps of puffs of smoke. She said she saw this one day, followed by a little man in a suit wearing a top hat. It came out of the bedroom, walked past the first opening in the kitchen, and looked at her with a blank stare. Made its way past that opening. I guess around the octagon wall, and then she saw nothing. I remember my dad thinking we were crazy and not believing us. So my mother and I ended up taking a trip to Maryland to get away to visit some family. I remember about our 4th day into the trip, we got a phone call at my aunt's house. It was my father, and he was upset. He told my mom to come home when she could, because he believes her for now. He said he came home from work one night, and the house wasn't totally pitch black, but black enough because he had a couple nightlights around the house. He walked in from the garage and put his hand on the kitchen light switch, but something caught his eye before he could turn the light on. He was looking in my brother's bedroom, and he said he saw what looked like little stick figures running around the bedroom, which scared him to death. He told us he slept out by the pool the entire night. Then, he told us the next night, he was sitting in his recliner watching TV, and saw the same black figure in the corridor that leads to my bedroom and my brother's bedroom. He said he shut the TV off and rubbed his eyes, and he said that when he opened his eyes, he saw the way of a silhouette of a face in the television screen. So, we finally came home after about a week. The funny thing is about this house, all the activities seem to have taken place in my brother's bedroom, and never my bedroom. It never went past the kitchen. I don't know what that means, but it was strange. I remember one night my dad, my mom, and myself watching TV in their bedroom. It was some kind of special on television. And I remember we all got a creepy feeling and we looked over towards the door. My dad, for some reason, had this pink recliner, kind of catty corner towards the door. When we all looked over, we saw a black figure peering over this recliner, and it had its 2 hands so you could just see the 2 hands in the face. And when we made eye contact with it, it shot towards the other end of the house, or just disappeared, but it looked like it ran. After that, we would start hearing knocks on the door all hours of the day. Eventually, my mom and dad had enough and they put the house up for sale. We ended up selling very quickly. And oddly enough, a month later we moved out and they moved in. My mom and I drove by one day and they had the house up for sale. Anyway, at 33 years old, I wrote the current owners of a time a letter and just asked if they have experienced anything. They responded back saying they haven't, but I've heard of people having trouble in the past. I don't know if they said they haven't experienced anything to save their face, but needless to say, the experience has had a profound effect on me to this day. The first story is the most unsettling for me. On our days off right after high school, my cousin and I would routinely drive my parents' golf cart around the neighbourhood and into the back of the large neighbourhood because it was abandoned and completely overgrown. We knew all the abandoned construction trails through the forest and where they met back up to the roads that were completely unbothered by any suburban houses. It was broad daylight, probably around 2 or 3 p.m., and we had parked the golf cart coming off of a trail and toward the concrete roads into the back part of the neighbourhood. The grass on the unused lots was covered in weeds and grass that was probably 5 or 6 feet tall off the ground. We unleash the pipe, take a few hits. All is peaceful. The birds are singing, the air is clear. He takes another hit and passes it to me. I start to light the bowl, and before I take a hit, I hear my cousin say my name twice, very seriously. I panic and think the cops have just pulled up or something. I look at him and he's staring straight ahead, shocked, and just says in a low voice, "What the fuck is that, cuz?" I look up and down the road and I see it. It's a little man peering out from the grass on the left side of the road, about 20 feet away. It looks like he's a naked humanoid completely covered in mud and crouched down as low as a person can go while still being mobile. It's not human, but it's human-shaped. With both of us staring at this creature, he backs up slightly and then, still disturbs me to remember this, Rhodey runs faster than humanly possible across the concrete road and into the grass on the other side. It was like a human moving as fast as an insect does when it panics. Imagine crouching down as far as you can go without falling over and then sprinting. This thing appeared to do just that. No words needed. I disengage the parking brake and gas it. We drive all the way to the front of the neighbourhood to the community centre area, probably a mile away, and decide we should just go home. Lots of frustrated, "What the fuck was that?" followed because there was no rational explanation at all. We still talk about that story all the time. Funnily enough, about a year ago, my parents moved to a bigger house about 100 feet from where this happened, once the neighbourhood started building back there again. The second story must have been about 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a year or two after the first one. Very general timeline, but you get the idea. I was hanging out with a friend and his girlfriend, as well as his weed dealer, which was a guy I'd known for a long time also. I'd stopped smoking weed by then, but everyone was good company, and I'd have a few beers while they did their thing. After a while, it became apparent that we would have to give the dealer a ride back, and we decided that we'd all go together and just take my car, so we did. It must have been 9 or 10 in the evening. The dealer's house is a straight shot down a main road for about 15 minutes. We get onto the main road through the city and everything's completely normal for a while. We're almost to the neighbourhood and suddenly, police lights. Oh fuck. We pull over into a well-lit gas station right in the middle and the whole routine unfolds. The officer accused me of pulling out in front of somebody trying to make a right turn, despite us having all green lights and riding in the middle of a 3-lane road. His reason for pulling us over was soon incomprehensible, but he ended up recognizing the guy in the front seat, the dealer, who fortunately didn't have anything on him. So cuts are waiting around and 3 more cop cars and the drug-sniffing dog. Of course, the dog hits off on nothing, and we get the whole kit and caboodle of stepping out while they search the car. Here's where the fun starts, because they begin pulling out a lot of my occult stuff, like an athame and wooden chest full of sigils and candles, and some other mobile all-purpose stuff. Haha, what are you guys, some kind of devil worshippers? I roll my eyes. I open the trunk for them. Nothing in there but a black robe and a Ouija board that I've used for years. Of course, they take both out and wave it around and make fun of it all some more. The encounter ends without any great dramatization because they expectedly found nothing. I loathed that they had tossed around all my tools, but I'm a pretty level-headed practitioner. We drive the dealer to his house and part ways, and head back to my friend's house to mess around and have a few beers. I head home at around 2 or 3 and go to bed. Let me forewarn you that I've never had sleep paralysis or apnea. I don't dream particularly all that often, or spectacularly, and I can't recall a single instance of experiencing a hallucination in my life. So when I see things, I know there's more to it. I don't wake up. I'm still asleep. I feel like my spirit is brought to the surface of a deep water. I open my eyes and sit up, but I can't see. There's a really weird noise, a rhythmic whooshing that's bringing me to full wakefulness. My vision slowly expands outward from the center with a blue tinge, very unusual. I immediately become aware of the fact that I'm not alone, and I look into the room that expands out from the foot of my bed. It glows blue because of the moonlight coming in from the windows at the opposite end. A few feet out from the foot of the bed is a high-top round table, with 2 high-top stools on either side. I can hardly see it though, because there's a perfectly silhouetted goat-man-looking being, perhaps 7 feet tall and very wide, sitting on the high-top stool closest to me and facing my direction. He has moose-like horns, and it's the source of the whooshing as he is breathing very heavily, just like a runner after a hard run. I can't see his features, but he's obviously looking right at me, and I'm looking at him. I blink. I'm experiencing sleep paralysis, I think. I blink more. I become very afraid, and there is really a 7-foot-tall goat man sitting in my bedroom. This is not a usual predicament that I have to face. I probably stare for about 10 seconds before I get hit with a sort of communicated feeling that the being had just come from doing something very awful to some people, one person in particular, and then rushed here to alert me of it. The breathing slows a little after another 10 seconds, and the being moves to get off the stool, the table behind him shifting and creaking as it does so. As soon as he hits the ground, he just fades out. I'm baffled, I'm afraid, but I'm relieved. I get up and turn the lights on, walk around the house, and everything is effectively normal. I sit and think about the whole thing, and the police incident didn't even connect in my head for probably 5 or 10 minutes. I go out for a smoke to observe the lake out back, and the sky because the moon is bright and beautiful. It might have been a full moon, but I can't really remember. I calm down and go back to bed, having been relieved by connection of events that I made. I don't remember what time this happened because I never looked, but it seemed like the middle of the night. I never had any further happenings in the vein of this experience, or seeing anything in the night, and I've never seen the being again. The last story wasn't super long after the Guardian of the Ouija board, probably less than a year. I worked at a movie theatre during this whole period, and I had taken to jogging at like 2 or 3 a.m. after work. Perfectly serene, safe, and there was never anybody awake or driving around. The house was on a small triangle-shaped configuration of roads situated around a lake, with only one road going through the forest to get back to the main neighbourhood. The road was out on the other side of the lake from where I was. Anyways, I come out from the garage and start walking down the road, and shortly come up to the first right turn. The orange of the street lamps keeps the roads pretty decently lit, but the orange lamps cast a spooky feeling. As I round the corner on the sidewalk, I see another jogger down the way on the other side of the road. I think about how odd it is to see another jogger at this time of night, so I slow down and kind of stare. It occurs very quickly that this is not another jogger, because most joggers are not 8-foot-tall ghostly shadow beings taking 6-foot steps. Due to the confusion, I don't even feel anything as I watch this tall, lanky shadow being run all the way down the road, right in front of me, and in between two houses and into the woods. He made absolutely no sound at all. As he passed right in front of me down the middle of the road, I saw that where his hands and feet should be, there was nothing but a fade to mist. Otherwise, he was just a three-dimensional absence of light. After seeing that and taking a moment to process, I decided that if an interdimensional shadow being was running at full sprint away from something, I probably should too. So I turned around and noped out of there and back to my garage to sit in existential terror. After about 30 minutes, I decided that I was going to conquer my fear and run around the triangle like I intended to before having a paranormal incident. I succeeded, terrified, and luckily nothing happened on that attempt. This was like 12 years ago. I was in 8th grade, and for my biology class, our teacher told us that we were going to build an aquarium. So she assigned each student what we would bring to the next class. They told me to bring a turtle, and I did. One day before aquarium day, my mom, against her will, went to the pet store and brought me a cute little turtle and a fish tank for it. I didn't pay much attention to it at the moment. I only fed it at night, and that was it. So the next day, we were all at school with things from the aquarium and other animals, only for our teacher to tell us that the coordination didn't approve the aquarium project. That meant I had a new turtle friend. So I looked at it for a few seconds and said, "Hi, now I think I have to give you a name." I looked at it a little more and thought, "You look like a Patricia." I don't know, that was the first name that crossed my mind, and I didn't even know if the turtle was female. After that, I didn't think about it for the rest of the morning. At noon, I was sitting there with the turtle on the fish tank, both waiting for my dad to pick us up when these two girls passed in front of me, and one of them got really excited for the turtle. So she came up to me and the other girl just followed her. She asked me if she could touch it, and I said yes. And then she asked what name it was, and I thought of Patricia, but I still wasn't convinced. So I told her that I hadn't chosen any. She then looked at her friend, who was very quiet and expressionless, and asked her what name she'd put to the little turtle, and this serious girl looked at it for a few seconds and only said, "Patricia." I thought, what the fuck? And told her that was funny because I was also thinking of the same name. Then she looked at me, still expressionless, and said, "This turtle looks like a Patricia." And again I thought, what the fuck? And I said, "Well, it looks like Patricia will be." The other girls smiled at me, and then they left. I felt so weird for a few seconds. It was crazy that that girl had the same thought of me. I don't know. I've always been a peculiar and precocious person, and that started in childhood. I asked questions about everything and everyone simply because I just wanted to know stuff and understand things. Around 6 years old, I started having these dreams. It was 2 years before my grandfather, who was basically my father figure of the time, passed when I had my first encounter. I had this dream that wasn't a dream about someone who had passed in my family. It was my aunt, and she appeared to me just to talk to me. She just wanted to hang out with me in my dreams, but I knew it wasn't a dream. It was like she kept coming around to protect me from something as I slept. But since I was a child, she made it seem like she was just visiting because she felt like it. For 2 years, I didn't really have any other encounters until the summer before I turned 8. I was at my great-grandmother's house asleep when I felt my kid dream turn into something too real and insane. I remember waking up in an operating room and I had a tube inside of me. There were these doctors there dressed in green scrubs and surgical masks, speaking a language I've never heard. It didn't sound like any of the languages we have on this planet. Every person in the operating room was blonde with blue eyes, and they all were at least 6 feet tall. They sounded angry and harsh, and kept shoving things down the tube in my body. I could feel everything as if I were actually there. I guess I was supposed to be asleep in this situation because one of the doctors saw me awake and started yelling at the others. They put a needle in my arm and it felt like I was floating in a warm tub. After that, I woke up and felt super nauseous, sore, dizzy, and I had a wicked headache. I can remember this as if it happened yesterday, and that night I went to bed at 10 p.m. and woke up at 3 a.m. after the encounter. I was only 7.5 at the time. Fast forward to that next year, the year my grandfather passed. After these first 2 encounters, I began having more and more experiences. By this point, it was mostly just dreams that were either eerily lucid or foretelling in some way. The year my grandfather died was the first time I was able to sense something while awake. I was spending time with him one night that year, and I always spend the night. The whole day he seemed fine, so I thought I'd spend the night as usual, but he was adamant that I didn't. As soon as he said no, it looked like his face became heavy, even though that wasn't how he actually looked for real. It also felt like I was being squeezed to the point of popping. I told him I didn't want to leave, but he insisted. I just knew something was wrong. But I was 8, so of course I had limited vocabulary and couldn't come up with a plan to not leave. The next day, he died from a heart attack. My mother took me with her to go to confirm that my granddad was who he was. So I ended up seeing him post-mortem. He was laying there with his eyes open and glazed. He had the heart attack while watching TV, but the weird part was that as I was looking at him, I heard the TV being on and saw him standing next to the bed looking at his body. He didn't seem to know that I was watching him, and then he just went away once they zipped him up. After that, my grandfather has come to visit me in dreams to go fishing and talk like we would when I was little, as if to keep up with my life. So this was the beginning of all the craziness that I feel now. Since my grandfather has passed, I've been able to see things, know things, and feel things I probably shouldn't be able to. I've encountered gods and goddesses. I've fought demons attacking me in my sleep. I've been able to visit heaven and hell, see angels, met the devil himself. I've met people in my family that have died before I was even a thought, and have talked to them about family history. I don't let the dead pass through me, but they do seek me out to talk or protect me. Those floating orb things that folks speak of have appeared to me before. I've experienced sleep paralysis in the form of spiritual attacks. I can astral project uncontrollably. That shit just happens, and the first time it happened was during surgery. But I can't make myself do it. It just happens. I've met angels. They smell like sugar cookies, by the way. I've also met Jesus twice. Gods I've met are Anubis, Dionysus, Adja, Hecate, Artemis, God, and I've been through the layers of heaven and hell. That's the easiest way to put it without giving myself a headache. So I grew thinking I was one thing, or another spiritually speaking, but because I have the ability to witness and act in all these capacities, I don't know what to call myself or how to deal with it. I can instantly know when something is off with a person. I've heard and seen things in pure daylight that I shouldn't even be able to. I'm almost impossible to lie to or keep a secret from, and I dream so lucidly and vividly that I've awakened in serious pain before. For instance, if I'm shot in a dream, I'll have pain for at least 2 days in the area the dream injury happened. So my question is, how do I control and navigate this shit? 1, without something taking me over, and 2, without it keeping me from sleeping. I've never really been afraid of this stuff because real life was scarier, and because a lot of what I ended up seeing manifests in real life around me, or it's telling me what happened behind the curtain. But I'd like to figure out if anyone else who shares this ability can just help me stay sane, safe, and well rested. About 2 weeks ago, I was going to Hardee's with the hubbin when I abruptly interjected that the word Yggdrasil was being screamed into my ears repeatedly. Along with hearing that as if it were roared at me, I began to see this pitch black, gnarly tree in the middle of a large black field. It looked as if the tree was scorched, and it didn't have any branches. At the base of the tree was white ash in a neat circle. I then witnessed about 5 or 6 horses galloping around the tree, as if they were mad or crazed. They all had white eyes, and they were also pitch black. I looked up to see intense storm clouds, like those you'd see before a tornado, and vibrant lightning within them. I noticed that tendrils of lightning were raining down on specific parts of the field and destroying it. It didn't feel random. Throughout the whole thing, I felt this sense of dread approaching. And in the physical world, I felt the need to be on the lookout. I was anxious, and I felt like I was being watched. I've never encountered Odin. I believe that I've had some kind of seer or conduit ability since my first experience at the age of 6. I don't know a lot and have to reach out for sources or those who can interpret what I believe I witness. I'm still a bit freaked out by it. My little brother's best friend committed suicide almost exactly a year ago. I sat with his crying mother, feeling her pain like it were my own. But what was also so angry at him? He abandoned my baby brother, his kids, a woman that was truly in love with him. But the sadness outweighed the anger. After the autopsy and his cremation, I suddenly awoke and sat straight up. I could feel someone. My dogs weren't freaking out, so I knew no one had entered the house from downstairs. I was looking around in the darkness, trying to get focus. My eyes made their way to the bedroom door, which I kept open for the cat. There was a spot that was darker than the rest of the darkness in the room. I was trying to figure out if my Jim Morrison poster was messing with me, but then it started to move closer to the bed. It was like if smoke could take the shape of a sphere. It slowly rolled toward me, with its smoke-like extensions rolling off of the air as it moved. It came to within inches of my face. I was terrified, but somehow knew it wouldn't hurt me. Then it retreated and went away. The next night, the same thing happened, except the room got cold, and I felt an overwhelming turmoil. I could see myself wanting to die. I reached up to touch it. The pain was so intense that I burst into tears. There were times in my life that I felt this low and I wanted to die. So to feel that again, after what happened, knowing that agony wasn't mine, made me physically ill. My cat fled the room. I knew it was him. It was my brother's best friend. I had seen that pain in his eyes many times. I had to run to the bathroom. I was very nauseous and crying so hard, I don't know how my significant other didn't wake up. Then it dawned on me. He just needed someone to understand. That person was me because I've been my entire life sensitive and I understand his pain. I've personally been there. Sometimes they come as lights, sometimes darkness, sometimes as what their physical being look like. Sometimes I can hear them, sometimes it's just a feeling. I was also always so scared when I was younger that I did my best to block it out. I looked at it like a curse, and because of this, over the years, I feel it less and less. Somehow, I miss it. It was so much a part of my being that I feel like I'm losing a piece of my identity, but I have no idea how to get it back, or what I'd do with it if I did. I just feel like what I thought was a curse was actually a gift, and maybe I could have done something good with it. Coweta, Oklahoma. A small, quaint, and haunted town Quetta was Indian territory. I lived in 3 different houses there, in different parts of town, as a little girl, and experienced hauntings or supernatural encounters everywhere I went. My very first memories are in that town. Some of them still scare me. There's a lot of history and a lot of old buildings and homes in the town. The first house I lived in was right across from some woods. My 3 siblings and I used to play there. One day, we decided to go in further than we ever had before. I was about 4 years old. We found an old, dilapidated shack. As we got closer to it, the leaves to my left flew up, and almost in a straight line, like they would for a sudden gust of wind, but there was no wind. It stopped right in front of me, and then there was a very loud and deep man's voice all around us that screamed, "Get out!" Needless to say, we ran like hell. I was the youngest, smallest, and the first one out of there. After this, I would always see an old man at the edge of the woods. He would stay there, like he was guarding them. My mother asked me one day why I was afraid of the woods. I told her because of the bad man. She inquired further. I told her that he was a bad man that didn't want us in the woods anymore. She brushed it off. Life went on. We moved away for a couple of years until my parents divorced. My mother moved us into a small 2-bedroom house that was close to our schools. She was sleeping on the fold-out couch and us kids had the 2 bedrooms. It was also right next to a cemetery. We'd play there, as curious children often do. There was always a man, probably early 30s, who would visit his mother's grave every single day. He was there every time we went, no matter what time it was. He'd pack food and camp out, talking away on this grave all day. We were intrigued. We'd hide behind the gravestones and try to hear what he was saying. I don't remember ever being able to make anything out, but his facial expressions and body movements were so casual, like there was someone sitting in front of him, keeping up the banter. One day, my oldest brother and I managed to get really close. We thought we were slick. All of a sudden, the man stood up, turned around, looked right at us and said, "What are you looking at, kid?" And then started speaking in a different voice, in a language we sure didn't understand. It sounded like well thought out gibberish, if that makes any sense. It's possible he was messing with us, but he was certainly creepy. I stopped going into that area. After a short time, we ended up moving into downtown Quetta. It was literally one street with small buildings neatly aligned on either side. We lived on a side street that was once a cemetery, back when the town was first settled in the 1840s. When they decided to build houses, they moved all of the graves. Well, I found out through my lack of supervision, it was 1990, and constant curiousness, that they built houses on top of graves. There were gravestones in the crawl spaces of at least 3 homes. There was a very old white 2-storied house that sat 1 block from ours. We saw multiple families move in and out only a few months later. The house was empty most of the time. My eldest brother, myself, and my cat climbed into the crawl space. My cat was awesome and lived the shit out of me. We attempted to turn a stone over so we could try to read it with our flashlight. As we did, something hissed. It was not a normal animal sound. It was like 100 voices all hissing at once in different frequencies. The hair all over my body stood up. We freaked out. My brother was out first, my cat second. As I got to the sidewalk, I saw my cat get picked up and thrown. Someone grabbed my hair and pulled me to the ground. I was so scared I started crying. My cat hid in my mom's closet and wouldn't come out until the next day. I ended up having a giant bruise on my right butt cheek. It was hard for me to even walk past that house after that. In this same house, with the graves and the crawl space, I would often see an old woman. I wasn't the only one that saw her but I did more than the others. I mostly saw her at night, but sometimes in the day as well. At night, I would often wake up to her standing by my dresser, which was just in front of the door. She was illuminated by the hall lights my mom would leave on for us. She would just stare and move her mouth, but I couldn't hear her. On 3 or 4 occasions, she would put her hand on my crayons that were on the dresser. The next day, they would be mouldy and dried up. I have no idea why she'd do that, but she did, and my mom just kept replacing them and still never believed me. Also would have stuff turn on by itself. Footsteps, whispers, doorknobs rattling, etc. I had a terrifying childhood in Coweta, Oklahoma. I had a haunting 9 years ago. I was a single mother with a 2-year-old boy and my 9-year-old niece. I'd gotten custody of my niece due to her mother being an addict. We just moved into a nice apartment and I was so excited to be able to give my kids a nice place. It was newly redone. New carpet, new walls, new trim, new everything. It was a weird setup though. When you walked in, my bedroom was on the right, living room on the left, and dining room straight ahead. To the left of the dining room was the smaller bedroom, which also had its own full bathroom. I think it was more for roommates than a family. I started having paranormal encounters the same day we moved in, so I always left both bedroom doors open at night so I could see into the kids' room past the dining table. From the start, I would wake up at 3:12 a.m. every night. A lot of times my son would too, but would start crying. I would wake up to an old woman in my room. She would always stand in the hall that led to the master bath. She would always try to talk to me, but I could never hear her. Then my son would cry and I'd go comfort him and go back to bed. But sleep was hard to come by for me. As time went on, she would bang on the walls where the water heater was, jiggle door handles, knock photos off the wall, wake me up every single night at 3:12 a.m. She got more and more angry that I wasn't doing what she wanted, I guess. So eventually, she started appearing as a black, smoke-like mass. She'd get closer and closer, mumbling something I couldn't make out. My cat would always flee. I could feel her anger. I could feel the tension and frustration thick in the air. When she wasn't that black mass, she appeared more tattered and unkempt. Her hair would be a mess when it was once done up nicely. She would look so tired, sunken in eyes. Became more and more frightening. The behaviour was downright aggressive. The banging became so loud that neighbours could hear it. She'd rattle the doors violently. I thought someone was trying to break in, but no one was ever there. My dreams were cruel torments of me being raped, murdered, having my children kidnapped, every night. There weren't many nights that I didn't cry myself to sleep. I was doing my best to raise 2 kids, one of which wasn't mine, work a full-time job, and then come home to so much negative energy. I decided to ask my neighbours about previous tenants, as they'd lived there for years. Apparently, a woman took care of her elderly mother. Her mother died in my room. The apartment was totally redone because that woman literally had to wallow in her own feces. The daughter was very neglectful, and the pets were also never cleaned up after. I also found out the reason I was able to afford that apartment was because the rent was significantly lower than the other identical units. The manager of the apartments never told me any of this. Shortly after, I woke up again at 3:12 a.m. But instead of the old woman or blackness, I saw my son squatting on a dining room chair. I said, "Troy, why are you up?" He looked me straight in the eyes, smiled his sweet smile and whispered, "Mama." I got up to get him. As I reached for him, he just vanished. My heart sank. I couldn't breathe. I thought something had happened to him. I ran into the kids' room and they were both fine, sleeping away. I cried, until I was totally exhausted and finally fell asleep. That's when I decided to break my lease and move. She'd unpack boxes, hide things, turn the bathroom light off when I was in the shower. She was trying desperately to talk to me, and I had no idea how to listen. I mourned for her. I could feel her pain, but I also had a family to take care of. I had my stuff packed and moved in under a week. If you have any idea what it's like to be a single parent with 2 kids and a full-time job, then you know that was an amazing feat. I had a dream after we moved that there was a diary hidden behind my water tank. Why I never thought to look in there when she kept banging? I just hope she found peace. I had a friend, Bailey, who was raped and murdered. At the time, I was a single parent with a 3-year-old boy. Every year, there's a balloon release at her grave. I had to take my son with me this year. He had never been to a cemetery and had never met Bailey or her family. He asked Bailey's mom if he could have one of Bailey's balloons. I never told him Bailey's name. She happily obliged. We all share good memories and laughs. We release the balloons. Tears are running down my cheeks as they silently drift away, further and further into the clear blue sky. After saying goodbyes, my son and I get into the car. I'm getting him strapped in and he says, "Thanks for taking me there, Mom." Odd, but I said you're welcome. Then he says, "We were here for the blonde girl, Bailey, right?" There were no pictures. "And she was here and is taking the balloons to heaven. And it doesn't hurt anymore, Mama, so thank you for taking me there." I wonder what she looked like to him. I wonder if she talked to him. The only person he was focused on the entire time was Bailey's mom, who needed the sweet innocent smile of that sweet blonde-haired boy more than any of us that day. He got to take one balloon home and had the best time of his life. We do not give our children enough credit. I'm a 35-year-old female. I've always been sensitive to the paranormal and had some crazy stuff happen throughout my life, starting with my earliest childhood memories. The older I got, the less the experiences became. The last thing I experienced was last year, after my little brother's best friend hung himself in the woods, not far from my house. He came to me a couple of weeks later on 2 separate occasions as a black, smoke-like mass. I could feel it was him. I knew him very well. I could feel all the pain he was in, and I knew he just needed someone to understand. The last time he came, the pain was so intense I burst into tears. I know what it's like to want to die, to be in so much pain that anything had to be better than that life, and to be so completely hopeless. I felt like that again, only it was his pain I was feeling. I cried for what felt like hours, said I understood, and goodbye. He didn't come back after that. Nothing really happens in my current home, and I've lived here for years. There's been a couple other little things, but it was always just someone passing through. I live by a cemetery. I'm having extensive hip surgery next week again. Also, my older brother has been missing since Halloween. He's an addict and a violent schizophrenic. I'm not. Doctor keeps a close tabs on me, and I tell him everything. I suffer from PTSD and recently had a major episode and have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. I lost my job. Needless to say, I'm vulnerable, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. 5 days ago, I had my first encounter. I'm pretty much living in bed since I'm in so much pain. Both bedrooms are upstairs. It sounded like someone was in my boys' room, moving stuff around. I thought it must be my cat, but she was sitting on my dresser. I swear someone peeked around my door, but when I looked straight at it, they pulled their head back so I couldn't see it. I looked away and they peeked around again, just looking at me. So I got up and hobbled, on a cane, around, but no one was there. I thought maybe someone came through the attic, but the door was still closed and locked from my side. I just closed my door. Earlier that day, I had the feeling I wasn't alone as well. I never get that feeling in this house, so that was weird. I make dream catchers. I have like 10 or so hanging on my ceiling by my bed. I was laying in bed reading the night after the first incident. The dream catchers started moving and clanking together. There was no fan on and no heat blowing through the vents. It was like someone dragged their hands across them. My hubby was in the room, but of course, he was sleeping. My cat left the room before it happened. Not sure if she left because of the presence or not. 2 days ago, I was downstairs in the hall, giving the dogs food. The little dog was staring at the end of the hall where the stairs and front door are. She was barking hysterically. I didn't think anything of it. She's 15, half blind, and mostly deaf. But then, clear as day, a man said, "Knock, knock." The dog cried and growled louder and ran behind me. It scared the shit out of me. I never heard anyone go up the stairs and immediately checked to make sure there was no one there and the front door was locked. I made hubby check the whole house. Thankfully, he was on his way home for lunch when it happened. The dog reacted, so I'm not losing my mind, right? We do have carbon monoxide detectors. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid about my brother at first, but I'm not so sure that's all this is. Or maybe because of how vulnerable I am, the spirits thought it'd be fun to mess with me. I don't know. Just worried about my brother and worried about my surgery. I did talk to my doctor about it. He said it could be the PTSD somehow. If anything else happens, I'll make sure to update. Sorry for the long read. I hope it was worth it. Would also love to hear your thoughts or advice. Started calling morgues and hospitals again where my brother was last known to be. Lo and behold, he calls me later that day, strung out and asking for money. I declined and he hung up. Those dreams where he was in a snowy place he has lost, so I guess I wasn't too far off. He was 2 years sober and threw it away. As for the weird things around my house, nothing else has happened. I just sometimes feel alone and scared, but that could definitely be from the PTSD. Anyway, it was good to vent, and at least I know my brother isn't dead yet. So my family is from rural Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Some people live in town, others live by the cornfields. The town was always quirky, yet spooky. There were tons of stories, like a Native American killed a man and stuffed him in a tree log. A witch cursed the town because they didn't expect her. There was a Mormon home outside of town that houses the founder for a few months. It was rumored someone tarred one of his followers and left him to die. Anyways, when I was 8, we moved into the town from the country. I didn't feel anything at first, but I always got bad feelings and would run past to the front room of the house. Lights would flicker, things would go missing. Well, my mum is very in tune to her surroundings and definitely has a gift to see things that are not there. My family began seeing a little boy and girl that would run around and play dressed in 19th century clothes. They would wave to people and run up and down the stairs. There was a man who smoked cigars and a lady in red. The little boy once came to my mom and pointed behind her TV to let her know my brother's epilepsy medicine was behind it. I also want to note we lived behind an old 19th century cemetery that was well creepy. So our family went through some hard times living there. A lot of fights between my parents. My brother was busy partying, which made things worse. And I eventually developed a serious drug problem. Mental health was a serious issue in our home. I'm not saying it's the ghost's fault, but it was odd. So we moved out after 10 years of living in the home. That was 10 years ago, and I still have creepy dreams about living in the house. People coming and going and just awful things happening there. Does anyone else have dreams of a childhood home that housed some spooky, otherworldly entities? I feel like part of me is stuck there. I don't know how to explain it. I'm an expatriate living in Japan, in a nice modern home with my wife. This happened about a year ago in our living room. There's a TV in the right corner against the far wall, a giant cat tower in the left corner of the far wall that goes up to the ceiling, and a long picture window between the two, usually with the shades drawn. On the opposite wall is the sofa. My wife and I had gotten 2 kittens a few months previously, and at this point, they were about 5 or 6 months. Playful, but starting to grow out of that phase. That evening, we were sitting on the sofa, and our male cat, Mikey, climbed to the top of the cat tower. After a few minutes, he started to stare at the corner of the wall and bat at a specific section of it. We were debating what he'd found, whether he'd found an insect or was just being a crazy kitten. While we were being entertained by his behavior, the spots he was batting and looking at started to move. He batted at it as he moved over to the other side of the cat tower and batted at the curtains. And then his head tracked it as it moved across the curtains to the other side of the room. He was very fixated on it. When it got to the other side of the room by the TV, the green TV light came on with a faint click, but there was no picture or sound. I was going to point this out to my wife, but I just didn't mention it. A few seconds later, the TV started up. I was just dumbfounded by the weirdness, but my wife was freaked out. If it was only the cat chasing after an invisible object, it wouldn't have been worth mentioning. And if it was only the TV turning on by itself, I would have blown that off. But what happened couldn't have been a coincidence. And that's the only time the TV has ever turned itself on like that. I should mention that I looked around for the remote control right after that happened, and it was on the coffee table in front of the sofa. It hadn't been touched or sat on. Yesterday, Micah came down from upstairs, looked under the sofa, flattened his ears and let out a long hiss. I immediately dropped down and looked under the sofa, but there was nothing. It's completely out of character for him to do anything like that. That got me to thinking about the other time. Six years ago, my wife and I adopted kittens. When our male was 6 months old, he started playing with something invisible at the top of a floor-to-ceiling cat tower. We sat on the sofa opposite the cat tower and watched him intently play. I went over and checked to see if he was playing with an insect. He wasn't. We were laughing at him playing by himself. The invisible spot he was playing with started to move across the room. As it moved off the cat tower, he reached his paw way off the cat tower and swiped at it. We watched him track this invisible object with his eyes as it moved to the other side of the room where our TV and air conditioner are. When this object hit the point, the TV power indicator turned on. And then a few seconds later, the picture turned on as well. We were shocked by this, and my wife was very frightened with it all. The TV remote was on the coffee table. In all the time we had the TV, this happened once. Second story. Last summer, I found 2 newborn kittens who obviously had been abandoned by their mother, crawling in mud and screaming for help. I took them in to foster them, and they miraculously survived. We have a deep and wide windowsill at our porch hallway, and we have a collection of mannequin ceramic or plastic cat figurines, arranged in a semicircle on the windowsill. When the 2 kittens were about 2 months old, I noticed one Saturday all mannequin who were in a perfect semicircle on the windowsill, had been shoved off to one side. I mentioned this to my wife, who thought I did it. She kept asking me if I did it as a prank. She was very frightened when she found out I hadn't. Without giving away too much of my private life, I'll say there were people in and out of the house that day, but every single one of them had come to my house before for years, and none of them had ever done anything like this. Which brings the story to a few weeks ago. I had to give one of my cats an emergency poop-related bath, and he got a cold or flu as a result, and spent the full day and the next morning on the sofa. The next morning, with the cat still on the sofa, my wife changed the input channel and got an incredible, bizarre fuchsia pattern on the TV screen. She took a photo of what she saw. My wife and the cat can clearly be seen in the reflection. This is not the same TV as from the first story, but it is in the same spot. My wife wasn't sure how long this would remain on screen, so she quickly grabbed her cell phone and took a picture. She told me she wasn't sure if this was a static pattern or a changing one because she wasn't wearing her glasses, and this lasted until she hit the input button about a minute later, changing the inputs from YouTube to broadcast TV. I wish she'd called me from upstairs or followed up the photo with a video, but that's what happened. For what it's worth, I told her to do that if it ever happens again. I'm 30-some years old. I lived at my mother's house for my whole childhood. No one died there that I know of, and the house was built in the 60s or 70s. Everyone in my house had experiences seeing shadow people. More or less, I wanted to share my experiences because people that haven't had paranormal experiences look at me weird. When I was around 10 years old, my mom and younger sister were all laying in bed. The bed was a bunk bed with a twin upper bed and full-size lower bed. I was laying next to my mom. My younger sister was up top asleep. My mom and I were reading books and talking occasionally. I heard the floor creak and looked up at the doorway. There was a black figure. Half of their body was in the bedroom, their hands wrapped around the doorway like they were just peeking in. It seemed to be about 5 feet tall. The thing that I remember the most were its piercing green eyes. No one else in my house ever saw that one. The figure we saw the most was a tall, broad, male-looking figure. The reason I say male is because he was really big and wide. You never see anything beside his silhouette. When I was 22, I moved back after having my daughter to live with my mom to help with my dad. He was dying. My dad passed 3 months before the next incident. The figure was not my father. I unfortunately never got to see him. I woke up to make my daughter a bottle. I left the same room as above story and walked into the hallway leading into the living room. The room has big picture windows across the room. The windows give light from passing cars, the moon, or any outdoor light. We were looking at the ground and shuffling through at about 2 or 3 a.m. and looked up and saw the tall, dark silhouette standing about 3 feet from me. He was really big and wore a fedora, wide-brimmed hat. I ran to the kitchen and hit the closest light, and he was gone. I didn't think paranormal. I thought intruder. My mother and sister still live there. They experience random things occasionally. We've never been hurt. Anyone ever experienced a piercing green eyes shadow figure or ghost or tall brimmed man? I'm from Yorkshire in the UK, which for as long as I can remember, has paranormal events taking place in all manner of aged buildings, including my primary school. My primary school, like many others, claimed to house the spirit of Bloody Mary, and even a Black Mary, but I knew better. I had a habit of sneaking into the building during break time when we're meant to be outside playing. And the first stair you can get to is one that's also meant to be home to a haunted storage room. I've personally fallen for this one when I was like 7, but I've come to realize that it was probably just a draft. But the day I realized this, I had my encounter. I was sitting on the stairs next to said room when I felt like someone was behind me. I looked up the stairs behind me to see a woman dressed head to toe in a black gown walk from where the window at the top of the stairs would be through to the classrooms. I didn't recognize this person and was compelled to follow them, so I got up, stepping every other step on the stairs to catch up to the person. But when I got up there, they were nowhere in sight. Now, I'm a curious person and was even as a child, so I took the risk in getting into trouble for being inside and searched all the classrooms and back rooms. The staff room was a separate building outside, so the odds of teachers being in here were next to none in my mind. And I found no one till the last one, where I found my own teacher just chilling, but they were dressed in normal clothes, nothing like what I'd just seen. I would go on thinking I must have made it up in my head, but I never forgot it. I would go on to find out once I had left that school to go to high school that my previous school was once inhabited by nuns, sisters of faith, as the area's church is just 2 minutes away by foot. And I came to the realization that Bloody Mary had never been in that building, but at least one of the nuns had. I know this isn't like dangerous or hyper exciting, but it's true. It was my first sighting that I know was really and not just something conjured from my mind. I have more from later in my life if people want to hear, including a very weird incident that happened during a lucid paralysis. I appear on the streets of my town centre, dressed casually, suitcase with me. But it's not my town centre. It's my town mixed with the village my partner presently resides in, as well as her surrounding city mashed together in a seamless way. If you didn't know these places intimately, you'd never know this wasn't a real place. I notice, but it's never enough to deter me. My curiosity is too great. After all, my brain is the best stage designer I've ever had the displeasure of meeting. Another male walks up to me, clearly looking for someone, which is perfect, because I know it's me he's looking for, so I don't have to wait any amount of time for this to kick off. "Are you the one?" he asks nonchalantly. I nod in response. "Nice to meet you. You got the keys?" They seem genuinely pleased I'm not messing around with pleasantries, when we could be exploring what I already feel is going to be our new home for the foreseeable future. As we approach the door on the side of the building, I notice that it is an amalgamation of a subterranean bar, a church, and specifically a superdrug shop, which for those you don't know is a place you'd go for toiletries, makeup, and any basic pharmaceutical needs you have. It's only after the incident is over that I would come to acknowledge how messed up that concept is in practice. Drugs, makeup, and the church. What a beautiful combination you've conjured for me this time. Waiting barely out of sight is my partner. She wants to see the place I'd be staying, since she's likely to be here a heck of a lot. I don't know how I know these things. It's like pre-installed information. I just have to assist the disbelief we have our usually greeting rituals. As the guy opens the door and we all enter. I know the stairs bank instantly to the right, but fold back on themselves to a land where there are 5 doors. I never walked through any of them, but I found myself in the room that is situated above the front door to this place. The room is spacious. 2 single beds sit against the headboards against the wall under the window, just waiting to be made. Now this is where something is clearly off. He introduces himself properly. He seems genuinely nice and interested to get to know me now we are out the way. but I can't hear his name. It's the same as before. I can never hear their names. Even if I ask again, it wouldn't change. It's always... I ignore it because I know why. I don't actually know why, but that pre-installed information I was talking about earlier tells me I understand. I explain who the extra person in the room is, and he understands and agrees to let me have pick of the rooms, as he doesn't need as much room as I do, given that my partner is likely to be around a fair bit since they live just around the corner. Literally just around the corner. I could be at theirs in less than 60 seconds if I left now. It's at this point I'm truly aware I'm not in the real world right now. We walked around the other rooms just to see what they were like, but in that moment, I liked the first room best. The first was quite narrow, enough space for an office maybe. It had one of those bunk beds that only have the top bunk. It's definitely not the one. We decided to skip the room in the corner, as it's bound to be a similar shape just based on where it is. That or it's the bathroom. The following room is truly a dream. It somehow has that beautiful autumn morning golden glow, as if there was a suburban street just outside. But that's not possible. We're on the second floor for a start, and there's nothing back there. This building should be connected to the church on this side. So how is this here? She perks up and feels this is the one. I agree, and we go to return to... But this is when everything went straight up to 10. The next thing I know, I flash to the hall and I'm pushed to the floor by this grotesque Caucasian woman with extremely dark, matted, mousy brown hair. They clearly don't have a vested interest in the products they sell in the super drugstore next door. I think the best way to visualize this person is to think of the girl from The Exorcist, age her up to about 1920, and scale back the supernatural scarring on her face and bags under her eyes. She had clearly been sick recently, if it wasn't plastered all over her cheeks. I'm sure I could smell it if I wasn't so distressed. Her eye dilated to the nth degree. She has me pinned by the shoulder. But she isn't my biggest concern. It's the thing behind her. When I first came back to the real world, I thought the woman was the thing, and someone else was attacking me. But I can't remember what this new person looks like at all. It's like there was another person, but there wasn't. I'm convinced I was seeing something they wanted me to believe to hide themselves from my view. I think this is the problem. I saw the darkness for what it was and didn't like it. I firmly believe had I not noticed it, it may have let me kill the girl for its amusement. But I'm good at this. Like, I'm really good at this. There was no way I wouldn't notice something invading my headspace without my permission. I'm engulfed with fear and the pressure of that thing lingering, controlling, possessing this person. I feel it all. All her feel, her anger. Oh, fuck her anger. It was so intense, but at the same time, I didn't. I was too focused on not dying. I couldn't wake up despite me vaguely hearing things going on in my real house. I was being forced to go through this. That's when I'm snapped back to this girl, piercing her jagged nails into my shoulders, and my head slams back and I see he's missing. Is he dead? No? I don't see blood or anything. I don't know where he is. He just vanished. It's at that moment that I found him. I glitched again. He is the girl. He and the girl is the shadow, grinning like a sadistic child. Out of nowhere, my arm slowly moves to his throat, and a cake slice tool in my hand, and slowly but firmly open up his throat. It's a deep gash and blood just pours out. As soon as I had a second to breathe, the girl was back piercing my shoulders again. But it doesn't last long. This time, it's my throat being opened, but this time by hand. They stood there grinning as my eyes struggled to stay open here, and I tried to force them open in the real world. Slowly taking the slice to their own throats and literally becoming a fountain, they slowly keel over, and then the last thing I saw was her floating past. They are the shadow. They're all over the place right now. They're on the floor, and the shadow passing by me instilling as much fear as they can before I pass. My partner doesn't do anything the whole time. It's like they aren't there right now, but I feel like they are just out of my point of view. I really hope they just despawned from this world because I wouldn't want them to feel what I felt. The pressure of all those emotions, the fighting for my life, but the worst is I was locked into it till it was down with me. Apparently the one thing I have control over is my mind. What happens when something else is holding the keys to it? What can you do? A little background. I was a mechanic in the Navy for 6 years. On my second ship, people would talk about a ghost they called Mumbles. Supposedly, Mumbles haunted the engineering spaces, where the ship's engines, generators, and big industrial air conditioners were. They called it Mumbles because you could hear whispering or mumbling over the loud equipment and while wearing earplugs. People also claimed to see a shadowy figure on the late watches, 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. or 2 a.m. to 7 a.m. And the general consensus was that this figure was Mumbles. One day, I was cleaning up after I'd done some maintenance on the ship's refrigeration units. It was a little after lunch, and I had earbuds in, listening to music. Over the music, I heard somebody whisper, "Frankie." Name changed to protect personal info. Frankie was another mechanic in my division that was an absolute jackass. He was very lazy and played dumb to get out of having responsibilities. I turned around to see if someone was behind me, but no one was there. I continued cleaning and heard "Frankie" again, just a little louder. I don't think anyone would believe me because Frankie was such a jackass, but the few people I told believed in Mumbles and believed my story. A few weeks later, I was filling a tank with water sometime between 11 p.m. and midnight. It was a very long process. I just stood there watching the tank level go up for about 45 minutes. When the tank was finally full enough, I turned to go to the next valve I needed to close, and I saw what was basically a shadow standing up. It stood there for a second, and then ran around the corner to where I needed to close the valve. I just stood there, frozen in fear. When I finally gathered the courage to turn the corner, nothing was there. I never saw or heard from Mumbles again. On the evening of September 7th, 2006, my friend Jen and I were driving home from a friend's house nearby where the Big Ear Radio Observatory used to be. It was somewhere between 10 p.m. and 11 p.m., near the corner of Cheshire Road and Route 23 between Delaware, Ohio and Lewis Center, Ohio. We were driving down Route 23, heading south towards Lewis Center, when Jen saw a bright light very distant in the sky. We both joked, saying it's probably a UFO. So we keep driving, and we eventually lose sight and forget about the distant object in the sky. Then as we're coming over the precipice of the hill, just beyond where the golf course is now, where the telescope once stood, there was an enormous glowing football-shaped UFO hanging right above our heads, steadily moving over the top of Route 23 heading towards Lewis Center. It was the most frightening and awe-inspiring thing I had ever witnessed. We stopped on the side of the highway and got out of the car. It was the largest thing I've ever seen. I felt like an ant beneath a giant's glowing boot. The object looked like it was engulfed in an orangish or reddish plasma, almost like what the surface of the sun looks like from close up. It looked as though it had flames bubbling and churning within it. I tried to take a video with my Motorola Razr, but the phone just wouldn't pick it up, even though it had just been working fine and nearly had a full charge. It slowly begins to back away from us a bit and begins floating toward the town of Lewis Center. We follow it back to Lewis Center where my friends and I watch it for nearly an hour, and eventually it began to gain altitude. Then, in a dizzying display of lights and flashes, it blasted away in the blink of an eye, leaving behind a wispy blue teal vapor trail. I found out later on that the Big Ear Radio Observatory in Delaware, Ohio, was where they had received the WOW signal in 1977. This object took up a large portion of the visible sky as we came up on it. I'm an airman. I've been trained to observe and identify aircraft. I would estimate the object to be the size of an NFL football stadium, just floating above the three-lane highway and houses and buildings. The object was witnessed by at least 5 people other than myself. As it was gaining altitude, glowing bluish, purplish orbs started cascading out of the main football, cigar-shaped object, one after the other. Each time one appeared, the momentum of which they revolved around the main object intensified, until all I could see was a spinning blue glow around the main football object. And in the blink of an eye, it shot off into a flash of light in front of it, like the Enterprise going to warp speed, leaving only a bluish trail haze behind. The whole experience was the most profound thing to have ever happened to me in my lifetime, up until that point. Back in 2013 or 14, sorry, I can't remember timelines very well, I was out at a restaurant with my family, and when we came home, we found our dog, Bonnie. I don't want to get into specifics about what we saw, but she had fallen ill, which the vet managed to attribute to some sort of infection. Moving forward a short while, unfortunately, it was certain that she wasn't going to get better due to her advanced age, and we had to have her put down. I don't remember much about that day, and I really don't like thinking about it, so I'll get to the point. Obviously heartbroken, I also felt guilty for not being in the room as she'd left us and cried myself to sleep that night. And I remember having a dream where I opened our back door to go into the garden, and I saw Bonnie sat there. I didn't exactly know what to do, but I remember bawling more than I ever have before and hugging her so tight. I'd like to say that it was just a normal dream, but I felt physically strong, which never happens in my dreams. It's like I wasn't in control of what was happening. A few years later, in 2016, my nan had been sent to hospital a few times due to various infections, and I think it was the 4th or 5th time she was admitted to a hospital. A part of me knew that I wasn't going to see her leave that place. At the time, I was in some sort of mental health focus group, and one day a family friend who worked there, Anita, kept me behind late after a session, saying that my mum couldn't come pick me up due to traffic or something. I immediately picked up that something wasn't right. Eventually, about 7 p.m, Anita took me home, and when I got through the door, I saw my dad standing in the kitchen, and I'll never forget the look on his face as he told me that the doctors said that my nan was expected to pass away the following morning. Later that night, my family got together to visit her, and she looked completely healthy, like there was nothing wrong with her. She was lucid, and my mum even managed to persuade the nurses to let my nan have a white wine spritzer, which was a favourite drink. She was so damn strong, even towards the end. I remember another patient coughing profusely, to which my nan responded by saying something along the lines of, "Shut up, I'm trying to die." I'm sorry about that tangent. It just feels good to finally tell someone about all this. Anyway, my dad took me and my brothers home to get something to eat, and after dinner, I had a horrible feeling, and even to this day, I regret this decision so damn much. I decided to stay home instead of visiting her one last time. Before I left the last time, I didn't even say goodbye, which I absolutely hate myself for. Instead of seeing her, I decided to write her a note that my mum read to her shortly after she passed away. She left us that night. On to my dream. It was nearly the same as the last. I went through into the back garden to see my nan there smiling at me. So I hugged her as hard as I possibly could until I was forced to wake up the next morning. She knows how guilty I feel about not seeing her and getting to say goodbye. And I'm certain she knows how much I miss her. I just wish I could thank her and Bonnie for giving me one last chance to say goodbye. Anyways, I'm currently 23. I'm one of those people with lots of unexplained experiences, but don't know why it's happening. This is why I'm here. First time I've encountered strange events was when I was about 6 or 7. I was sharing a room with my older sister at the time, and it was late at night. I was woken up by the sound of people walking around the room. As I looked up, there were about 3 or 4 men who looked like shadows, but in 3D. They were talking to each other and turned towards my sister's bed, approaching her. Then they started talking really badly of my sister, horrible things they wanted to do to her, things a 7-year-old shouldn't ever know of. It scared me so badly, I pulled the covers over my face, and as I pulled away the covers, they were gone. Needless to say, I was terrified. Second thing that happened was when I was about 10 or 11. It was broad daylight when I came back from school and immediately started doing my homework. I was home alone at the time as my dad went to pick up my sister. Eventually, I heard my dad and sister return home. My father went straight to the living room, placing the car keys on the table, while my sister went into the room I was in. She put her school bag on the floor and started to tease me about my homework. Sisterly stuff such as, "You're just doing your homework, it should have been done earlier," and similar things. I got annoyed and turned around towards her and, you guessed it, no one was there. I looked all over the apartment, but no one was home. My dad and sister hadn't returned yet. I got scared and called a friend to come over. The same friend I called over was a friend who once came to hang out with me and knocked on my door. No one responded, but she stated she heard me playing inside of the apartment. She got mad at me for not letting her in. Luckily, I had my sister to back me up that we weren't home at the time. Third thing that happened was during a summer family vacation. I was about 14 years old when my family rented an apartment near the sea. Unfortunately, the owner's husband just recently passed away, so we couldn't make too much noise out of respect. One night, I was laying in bed listening to music on my earplugs. As I went to switch sides of the bed, I saw a figure of a shadow person standing at the foot of my bed. Again, it was a full 3D shape of a man, but dark as a shadow. I tried to explain it logically, but couldn't. I looked away and back at it. It wouldn't go away. This lasted for a good few minutes when I got up and went to open the doors, asking my parents if I could leave them open. They said yes without any questions. It took me a year to tell them what had happened. I had also encountered similar things in my sleep. A few times, just as I was about to wake up, I'd hear and sense 2 shadow people next to my bed. "Quick, we should go. She's about to wake up." And they would be gone when I awoke. I'm aware this might have just been a dream, and I've never made a big deal of it. I would also experience sleep paralysis and false awakenings quite a lot, as well as strange dreams of the people who have passed away. This started in my teens and goes on till this day. On the topic of dreams, I had also dreamed a few things that actually happened in real life. The biggest one is when I dreamt some apartment I've never seen before. And you guessed it, as I was looking for the apartment, I've seen one just like the one in my dream and actually rented it. I lived there for about 2 years. The apartment is where my 4th experience happened. I was about 20 years old, and it was daytime when I was doing research for college. Someone knocked on my door. Immediately, I thought it was either my neighbours or the owner of the building, since no one else could enter the house. In order for this to be understood, you'd have to know the arrangement of the building. The entrance is always locked, since there are only 2 apartments, so no one else but us and the owner has the key to the entrance. As you enter, there's a staircase leading up to these 2 apartments. No windows, just a door with a staircase leading up. Back to the story. I go and unlock the door. there's a woman mid to late 20s asking if this is a nail salon. This didn't confuse me that much, since there was a nail salon right next to the building. I explained to her where the salon was, but she just stood there silent with a smile on her face. I got the feeling she wanted me to show her the salon, so I went. This is where it gets strange. We go downstairs and the front doors are locked. I thought, in some weird shape or form, that the doors were left open, so, therefore, she could enter the building, but they were locked. I actually said it out loud. The doors are locked. She just stood there and smiled. I went upstairs to get the key and let her out. She wouldn't leave until I showed the salon with my hand, right there. She left. A few days later, I asked my neighbours if they let someone in or somehow left the doors open, and then went and locked it later. They responded negatively. I didn't want to go into too much detail as I didn't want to freak them out. These are basically the bigger unexplained things that have happened to me. I'd also experienced smaller ones such as phantom smells. I'd smell flowers and candles like at the funeral. Once I called over a friend to smell it, and she could smell it too, stating it was a very uncomfortable smell. This happened a while back, but with Halloween approaching, it popped back into my mind and I thought I would share it here. I was an average 23-year-old getting ready for bed. I turn off the light, get all nice and cozy, and then it starts knocking. It was constant, with maybe 1 second between each knock. In my mind, I was thinking it was probably a bug. I turn on the light and go look for it to let it out the window. However, I didn't find what I thought was a bug, and knocking had stopped as well. After some time, I give up, turn off the light and go back to bed. The knocking returns again in the same pattern. Constant knocking with a second between each knock. At that point, I knew I needed to deal with this bug, as it will probably be doing this all night, and I wouldn't be able to get a decent night of sleep. I turn the light on and get out of bed, and once again, the knocking immediately stops. This time, I decided that I will do a full search of my room until I find the source of the knocking. What do I find? Absolutely nothing. With nothing else left for me to do, I go back to bed. The second I turn the light off, the knocking starts again. I'm sitting in the dark, listening where the sound was coming from. I couldn't quite figure it out, but the closet I could guess was a table next to the wall across from my bed. As I turn on the light, the knocking stops. I didn't want to get up and go look for it again without any success, so I turn the light off to pinpoint the direction of the sound a bit more clearly. As I go and reach for the light, my hand barely touching the light switch, the knocking stops. Thing is, I didn't turn the light off just yet. My hand was barely touching the switch. So without turning the light, I moved my hand away, and as I did that, the knocking returned. It was at that point that I knew this was not just a bug. I wanted to confirm that whatever it was reacting to me turning on the light. So, I started slowly reaching towards the light. As I did that, the knocks were becoming slower and slower, as if it knew I was about to turn it on. Then, without turning on the light, I started to pull my hand slowly away from the switch, and the knocks became faster and faster until they reached their regular pattern. I was baffled. I did this a few times. I would reach for the light switch really fast, the knocks would stop. Then pull my hand away slowly, with the knocks slowly getting faster and faster. Every single time, without exception, the knocks were behaving intelligently, depending on how fast or slow I would reach for the switch. The more I tested it, the more real it got. I was sure that whatever it was clever and observant enough to know what I was doing. What's weird is that I wasn't afraid at all. I only got a bit freaked out by the whole situation, as this wasn't supposed to happen, and it was definitely not normal. It started to sink in that I'm engaging in this really strange game with something that I don't understand. I'm messing around with something very foreign to me. I've had enough of this. If I had just gone to bed, the knocking would probably persist, so I tried testing it out with the light on my phone. I figured out that the knocking would significantly quieten down if I turned the phone flashlight on. I moved my phone a bit away from my head so that the light wouldn't bother me, but still kept it close enough to me where I was illuminated. I left the flashlight on the whole night. I could still hear some knocking from the darkest corner of my room, but they were definitely more tolerable. One knock, then about 5 seconds of silence, then another knock. About 10 seconds of silence, then another knock. Eventually, the knocks either stopped or I fell asleep. A bit of context. I started work as a cleaner in a hospital a month ago. For the last 2 weeks, I've been working in a department that's for cleaning and sanitizing theatre equipment. Another little bit of context, the department was formerly a theatre over 20 years ago. There were a few days last week that I had to work on my own. Normally 2 people work in this department because there are 2 sections. A couple creepy things happened to me. The first night, I heard an elderly man say my name as clear as day in my ear around 11:30 at night. I was 100% alone because I was just finished cleaning the whole department and there was absolutely no one other than myself there. I nearly shit myself. I came to terms with the fact that a lot of people have unfortunately passed in this department. The next night, things were fine. Nothing out of the blue happened. Someday, however, I was polishing some steel when a handprint slowly started to appear. This happened 3 or 4 times. Each time, I would polish the handprint away. After the 5th time it happened, I got pissed off. I only had 4 hours to clean a huge department, 2 bathrooms, 2 sluice rooms, and a kitchen as well as polish and shine a shit ton of steel. What I'm saying is, I went to work early to get my work done, and I didn't get it all finished because of how much there was to do. So I said, do you fucking realise how disrespectful that is? I don't have enough time or patience to clean this whole place to the standard that's expected. And here you are screwing up the work I'd just done. Now, if you don't mind, the next time you do that, I'm out. And you can clean this place yourself. Got it? All sounds stopped. And not 10 seconds later, I heard an awful lot of typing. I got super embarrassed thinking someone heard me giving out to something that might not be there. I checked the department only to find that I was the only one there. I went back to the room I was in only to see the keys on the keyboard getting pressed left, right and center. I just stood there like, fuck no. I finished polishing the steel and mopped the floor and got the fuck out of that department. I almost died when I got out of the department and ran into a care assistant who was getting some tools that were needed for labour. She asked me if I was okay, so I told her that the department was creepy. She ended up telling me that the department was used as a temporary morgue for a few days, about a month or 2 before I started. I can't describe how happy I was when I saw that it was time for me to clock out. I found out my friend passed away on August 1st, 2017. At the time, we'd been out of touch for a few years as we'd both got married. I stayed in our hometown. He'd moved out to Washington, D.C. However, in our high school and college days, we'd been very close and spent a ton of time together, playing sports and going to concerts. He'd gone off to college, and I'd visited him a handful of times. On one of those visits, I brought my new girlfriend along. She's now my wife. Naturally, we hadn't stayed in touch as we got older, but always chatted whenever our paths crossed. So I was upset to learn he'd been killed in a car accident overseas. A day after I'd heard of his passing, my favourite band, the Foo Fighters, announced a secret show at a tiny club in Chicago. The following day, my wife and I managed to get 2 tickets. We felt lucky, Visitor capacity was only around 1,000. The hard part was, not long after we'd scored the tickets, it was announced that my friend's funeral was going to be the same day. Obviously, I couldn't be in two places at once. I struggled to make the right decision. I asked my mom for her opinion, and she felt that maybe getting the tickets was kind of a sign to go, as we'd gone to so many in the past and had so many great memories. So, my wife and I opted for the concert. It was a 5-hour drive to Chicago, and we spent the majority of our time reminiscing, but also feeling guilty. That night, as the Foo Fighters took to the stage, Dave Grohl slowly talked while plucking his guitar. As he started, I wondered what they'd open with. To our amazement, they played our favourite song, Aurora. It's a beautiful song about the cosmos and the unknown. It had also been a handful of years since the band played it, and after doing some research, that they have been the only time they opened with it. My wife immediately burst into tears. I was in shock. I couldn't believe it. All my guilt washed away. It was like a head nod from above that it was okay. Truly unexplainable, but maybe not paranormal. Our daughter was born in 2019. Her middle name is Aurora. This happened at least 3 or 4 years ago. When I was a kid, I was spending my weekends at my grandma's place because I could do whatever I wanted. And whatever I wanted was to play games all night on some shitty laptop while Skyping with my friends. Okay, nothing weird here. Every night, I was getting this feeling of being watched, and often felt like there was someone walking behind me. Like I could almost hear the steps, but when I looked back, no one was there. And my grandma was either sleeping or in another room. It happened every time I was there, but I brushed it off, thinking that I was tired and probably just imagining things. Fast forward a few years of this. I changed high school and I lived with my grandma for 2 years because she lived close to it. The next thing I'm about to write caused me to sleep with the lights turned on for a month or so, and I still get the chills from that night. It was some intense nights of playing League of Legends. It was around 6 a.m. It was very dark outside and I had no lights on. I was sitting in my bed looking at memes, and I got that sudden feeling of being watched, and with the corner of my eye, I saw that something was different. Near the corner of the room, I saw a shadow on the wall. A figure so dark that the darkness around it seemed like dark grey. I stared at it while thinking that I'm tired and should go back to sleep. While thinking this, the shadow figure started moving. It was tall but short at the same time, walking fast but slow. It walked to the opposite side of the room and disappeared. The next day, my grandma was very worried, scared, and didn't tell me why at first. After I questioned her, she told me that she saw the same thing in the living room. Another thing that happened there was a bookshelf falling off randomly without any earthquake or instability. The thing sat there unmoved for probably 20 years. Before the shadow thing, I invited some friends over and they kept saying that they are seeing shadows, but I brushed it off. Happily, I don't have to see that place again, due to my grandma passing a few years ago. This is a strange experience I had at the round age of 18. I was sleeping on the couch in my mum's living room when it happened. I was initially dreaming as I entered a large room with a pool to my left and a wall to my right. I continued to walk along the wall and saw a hallway entrance on my right. As I approached the hallway, the pool room transitioned into the living room where I was sleeping, and the hallway ended up being the front entry for my mom's house. It was early morning and the sun was already illuminating the house. I found myself lying awake on the couch. I continued to focus on the entryway. There's a closet over there that was left open from the night before. As I stared, I suddenly saw a creature looking at me from the top edge of the door. It had what looks like burnt skin, and didn't appear to be much taller than a toddler. It seemed playful and curious. It kept peeking out from behind the door at various heights, as if it was messing with me. I felt extremely curious and decided to go over to check it out. It was at that point that I realized I was paralyzed. I didn't feel any level of fear after the initial shock, only extreme curiosity. I was actually so curious that I somehow gained the ability to move in a limited fashion. I slowly moved myself off the couch to my knees as I continued to stare at this thing. All the way up to the point, it was giggling and jumping around the door in a playful way. The moment I got to my knees and began to stand up, the creature froze in place while staring directly at me and began to show an expression of complete terror and surprise. Shortly after this, it disappeared behind the door and I never saw it again. The moment this happened, I snapped back into my body on the couch and I opened my eyes to find myself still laying there, as if I'd just woken up. Everything in the room was exactly as I saw it a few moments ago. The closet door was open, the sunlight was illuminating the room. Even the small details of the living room were exactly as they were. I immediately jumped up and ran to the closet door to see if it was still there. And of course, it was gone. I don't really know what to make of this. I've never seen that thing again in over 10 years. To add context, I had moved in with my roommate 8 months prior to his grandfather's death. He lived with his grandma, grandpa, and aunt. They had told me stories of their paranormal past before my roommate's grandfather's passing. They had told me stories of a little girl, a lost soul who likes to sing. My roommate's other grandmother also died there. My roommate has the aura of a curse as well. His family once lived in a very demonic home in Florida, so a pretty paranormal past. However, I myself have felt a different connection to the paranormal. I've always thought that I have the ability to see the otherworldly side. Medical practitioners have said it's schizophrenia, but this isn't how Luke they would describe. I see people, humans who lost completely confused. Sometimes they look as if they have consciousness, like they can really be real on another plane. It's up to your morals to believe me, but this is my truth. My mentor in life dies. My roommate's grandfather had died in my bathroom one evening on a rainy Monday. It felt like all three eyes, third eye I possess, opened and blinked in perfect unison. I could feel every soul in the house, the little girl, the grandmother, and the grandfather. Last week, I ordered a pizza for my roommate and I. As I got a notification that the pizza was here, I went to the front door and looked through the peephole. There was no car anywhere in sight, but I noticed something moving through the peephole. It took me a second to adjust my vision, until it hit me. There was a little girl with long, dark brown hair, almost black, but you could tell it wasn't black. She was wearing long-sleeve sweater dress with a white collared shirt underneath, long school socks and black dress shoes. She was twisting side to side, facing a direction where I had previously, the night before, seen a shadow man move across my neighbor's yard. I pulled away from the door and tried to keep my composure. I walked back to my roommate's room and told him everything. He said, "Whoa, my roommate's sister is the only one in the family who's seen the girl, and it's the same girl." She's been known to see the paranormal as well. As I write this, I can feel all souls wandering around the house. They're observing. I have 5 cats who play with the spirits. The cats look at them and feel them too. Something about today made me share this with you. I hope it means something. I moved into the house I'm currently in with my friends about 8 months ago. Initially, I was in the smallest room in the house, but after the girls living in the master bedroom moved out, I agreed to take it at the higher cost of rent. It seemed like a sweet deal. My own bathroom, doors with locks on them, and the second largest room. One roommate has the living room, which is bigger. With how my room is arranged, I can see into my bathroom from my bed if the door is open. About a week passed by, and I'd wake up and look into my bathroom to see someone standing in it. I didn't really think much of it for a while, even though my bathroom would get oddly cold, and if I left the door open at night, I'd see the silhouette. About a month later, I walked in on a discussion between all my roommates about how their tools on a shelf in the garage got thrown off while one, let's call Robert, was smoking in it at night, alone. They then mentioned how things will fly off tables and shelves sometimes. Another roommate, we'll call Matt, smokes in his truck in the driveway and said he heard a girl aggressively whispering his name but couldn't find anyone. The garage always had an off vibe at night, but now it made sense. I tried not to think about it, but the silhouette in the bathroom kept appearing. I started keeping that door shut at all times. Things got progressively worse in my room. Initially, it was only my bathroom, but after I kept the door shut at night, it moved. I began hearing someone outside my sliding glass door on the deck, but no one would be out there. I had a hard time sleeping because I kept feeling eyes on me from the deck. After a couple paychecks, I got blackout curtains, since I didn't have any curtains to begin with. The noises continued. One night, I put together a new fan. Not 5 minutes after I finished, it got thrown into the corner of my room while I was on Xbox Party. I put it back up and got back in bed, before I felt a weight shift and saw the outline of someone sitting on my bed on my sheet. At that point, I got scared and went to my girlfriend's, let's call her Amanda, house for the night. The next day, late in the evening, I came home and started gathering laundry from my room. I felt a hand tap my hip 3 times and once again left to Amanda's house for the night. After that, things only got worse. Shadows moving on my walls, thumbs on my closet door, lights and fans in my bathroom turning themselves on. I can see under my bed through the reflection on my TV. When I turn it off, someone would be laying under my bed or sitting at the foot of it. It got to a point where it would look like someone was crawling on all fours around the edge of my bed. Amanda and I tried burning sage and other things she suggested in the room. It would last for a time, but eventually the silhouette would return. Amanda and I eventually broke up about 3 months ago, and it all got worse. I got really depressed, and I think that it understood that and would make more noises and show itself more often. Time passed, and I guess I got used to it, or desensitized to it. It's not like I really had anywhere else to go. It stopped throwing things, turning lights on, and walking on my deck. I thought maybe it didn't care anymore since I had gotten used to ignoring it. For a little while, everything went silent in my room. Almost a month ago, I quit my job due to hostility from co-workers, and as of now, I'm waiting on word from an interview. Since I was home all the time, I caught Robert on a day off and talked to him about it. Robert mentioned that when I was gone and he was home alone, he would hear things from my room, like I was home. What disturbed me was when Robert mentioned he grew up across the driveway from our house and remembered when someone's daughter committed suicide in one of the bathrooms, though he didn't remember which one. It made me wonder, because most of the activity happens in my bathroom in the garage, though there has been a couple one-offs in other places of the house. Now, starting about 3 weeks ago, I would lay down to sleep. I'd get to the point where I'm not awake and can hear everything, but still just on the cusp of sleep, before I'd hear a girl's voice. The first few times, I couldn't tell what she was saying. I would just suddenly wake up with my heart racing and see a shadow move. One time in particular, I heard her very clearly say, "You need to tell him," as if someone whispered in my ear. When I opened my eyes, a perfect outline of a woman backed away from the side of my bed. That's the only time I've ever understood what she was saying, and the clearest outline I've ever seen in my life. As of right now, It's not as bad as it used to be. I was told not to feed it or pay any attention to it, but since that never changed anything, I tried to talk to her late one night. What's the worst that could happen at this point? I introduced myself and apologized for all the times I had yelled at her. Almost the same night, the entire vibe changed. She's still in here. She makes noise on my closet door and my bathroom gets ice cold whenever I go to use it at night. But I don't feel in danger like I used to, though I still wake up with my heart racing whenever she does wake up. 2 nights ago, I was just about to fall asleep and I faintly felt an arm wrap around me and the faint feeling of someone trying to cuddle up to me, which as much as it freaked me out, I fell asleep anyway. Again, I've got nowhere to go. I have to get used to it and just try to make her angry again. Does anyone have any experiences like this? I've dealt with paranormal stuff a lot throughout my life, but I haven't believed quite as much as I do now. I thought I was crazy until she started to harass Robert, Matt, and the other roommates. I haven't asked them all about it recently, but from all I can tell, the house is not as bad as it used to be. When I was a toddler, I would sleep in my mother's bedroom, and I'd frequently wake up to the sight of a man in the wardrobe. The wardrobe was an antique. If the wardrobe was closed, the man would walk through the door, and he'd walk towards me, hold out his hand as though he wanted me to touch him, before walking to the fireplace and disappearing. I used to be terrified of this man. His eye contact was very intense, so I'd hide under the covers or pinch my mum awake. But I remember the final time I saw him. When he reached out his hand, I touched him. The air was ice cold, and I never saw him again. Over time, I've kind of convinced myself children are imaginative. Maybe you were hallucinating, as there are many explanations for why someone might see something. I, however, do not have any mental illnesses. That's all fair and good, but other unexplains have occurred to me personally that I can't explain. Guests and family have had experiences, but I'll stick with myself for now. When I was 14, I had to share the master bedroom with my mum again. We had separate beds. And that's when the knocking began. The wardrobe would regularly knock from the inside. 3 sharp raps and always when I was alone. The knocks were extremely clear. I may have had an odd response, but I tended to just ignore it and didn't tell anyone. But then it happened to my sister. The wardrobe knocked, and she ran from the room screaming. The knocking actually progressed. It happened at the attic window, different room, when I was with friends. They ran crying. It then happened to my ex-boyfriend's window, a completely different house, and he ended up wrapping rosary beads at his window. With each incident, the knocks are always the same, 3 hard raps, although occasionally the knocks would repeat themselves. I haven't heard the knocking in a few years now, but I'm wondering if any of you have any ideas, and any idea why it would follow me. The knocking could be unrelated to the original sightings as a child, but I thought I should mention it as it was the same wardrobe. My then boyfriend, now husband, inherited the house built in 1950 of his grandparents back in 2018 because his grandfather couldn't take the stairs anymore, which forced them to move out. We moved in shortly after in May 2019. The first 3 weeks went well. We cleaned the house and made it our home. In summer, things started getting weird. FYI, my boyfriend never believed in ghosts or anything paranormal. I was just hoping that the creepy stories I heard were just stories. But here are a few of our encounters. It started out quite small. Random things like the TV, microwave, or washing machine started acting out. We didn't think much of it due to the fact that they were quite old already, but were still working, so we didn't throw them out. Doors started opening or closing on their own without any door or window open, so the wind was not the culprit. One time, the door, which never makes any noise when being closed, opened, started opening with the loudest and most chilling screech I've ever heard. I closed and opened it to test it out, and it didn't make a sound. One night, my boyfriend and I were in bed. It was around 10 p.m. We were both awake talking about some stuff, when suddenly a loud noise came from across the hallway. It sounded like the big metal ladder we kept in that room the noise came from had fallen over. We got up to check it out, but everything was normal. Nothing shattered, and the ladder was standing perfectly straight, leaning against the wall. One night I was home alone watching TV because my boyfriend had to work late. It was around 10 p.m. Next to the TV was a glass door. Something kept me looking, and every time my eyes landed on the door, I noticed a piece of white fabric in the left corner, as if someone in a long, white, flowy gown ran past the door. This happened multiple times during that night. I told my boyfriend, and he opened the glass door to take a look. As soon as I stepped near that door, I started freezing like it was winter. But it was summer and it was really hot outside. We couldn't find anything that explained what I saw. One time, my boyfriend and I were getting ready for bed. He was already in our bedroom when I was still brushing my teeth. It was almost midnight when I heard a little girl tell a story. I thought that my boyfriend was watching a video, so I brushed it off. When I came into the bedroom, I asked him what he was watching. He looked at me confused and said that he wasn't watching a video at all, and he thought I was watching a video of my little niece chattering around. It couldn't come from outside. As I said, it was almost midnight, and it was fall, so the nights were getting quite cold. So all of our windows were closed, but it sounded like the girl was standing right next to us. My boyfriend and I were fighting over something, and I told him to leave me alone so I could calm down a little. He went outside to work in the garden, and I stayed in the bedroom when I heard something that sounded like someone was tapping their fingers impatiently on a firm surface. It came from the door frame right outside the bedroom. It startled me a little, and I stared out the hallway. Nothing. Then I heard it again. I got nervous and I grabbed my phone to call my boyfriend. I came back inside to look, but of course, there was nothing. Hello everyone. I, 19 female, lost my brother who was 21 at the time of his passing due to his battle with depression. This was in 2012 when he ended his life. I was only 10 when I was told the news about his passing and had a hard time accepting that he was truly gone. I was removed from school for about a week to plan his funeral and just be with family. My first day back to school, I was walking in the halls all alone as everyone was in class. I had to leave to take a moment to collect myself as I was crying over my brother. Clear as day, I remember hearing my brother call out my name. I could smell his cologne and felt the hair on my body stand straight up. I was spooked at first, as when I turned around, I saw the papers on the wall move as if someone had run past them, and the wind from the running blew them. I never said anything to my family about it, as I didn't want to upset them. Until a few years later, I was laying in my bed and I felt the presence of someone in my house. This was normal as my house is actually haunted. When I looked up at my doorway, I saw my brother standing there just smiling. I remember freezing before I screamed for my dad. He quickly vanished right before my eyes. I never in my life thought I would see my brother again. That night, I remember just staring at my doorway wondering if he'd come back. Since then, there's been a few encounters, whether it's just smelling his cologne and having the sense of presence in the room, to seeing some of my things like our pictures moved from where they are hung or placed. My bedroom is normally locked when I'm away and no one has a key, so I know that he is the one looking at our pictures. At first, I was so scared and spooked, but now I feel safe and at peace whenever he stops by to see me. He tends to visit me in my dreams as well. Oh, I wish my dreams were real. I'd love to hug him again.